The commission will come to order. We will start with introductions, followed by our approval of minutes from our last meeting and session on May 19th, and then we will have public comment. First up with introductions, I will kick us off. My name is Nick Neptune, Chair of the City of Raleigh Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Commission. We'll continue with our Vice Chair.
Joe Caruso, Vice Chair and Chair of the Policy Committee.
Tammy Stern on the Planning Committee.
Jeronica Goodwin, Planning Committee.
Elizabeth Alley, Policy Committee.
Alex Rotenberry, and I'm with the Policy Committee.
Brian Thomas on the Outreach and Engagement Committee.
Mary Jo Gallenbeck, Planning Committee.
Celeste Bravo Taylor, Planning Committee.
Will Shoemaker, Mobility Development Supervisor.
Barbara Godwin, Bike and Pedestrian Program Manager.
Ms. Clark, would you like to introduce yourself?
Beverly Clark, Chair of the Parks, Recreation, Greenway Advisory Board.
Thank you. Moving forward with our approval of minutes, hoping that our commission has had an opportunity to review the minutes. Do we hear a motion to approve?
I motion to approve.
Second.
Hearing a motion and a second for a motion by Commissioner Gellenbeck and a second from Commissioner Rotenberry.
Well done.
Hey, I've been working on it for 30 days.
30 days.
Do we have votes in favor?
Aye.
And hearing none opposed, seeing all votes in favor and none opposed, then the minutes are considered to be approved. Moving forward into public comment. I do love how swiftly we are moving through our agenda this evening. I would like to, let's say, get a show of hands, because I understand we have a handful of folks here for public comment. Could I just see a show of hands of who is here in attendance for public comment? I see 1, 2, 3, 4. And I'd like to identify, so I see 4 hands for public comment. I'm looking for a Mr. Ted Van, there he is, okay. We're going to save Ted Van, is it Dyke? Ted Van Dyke. We're going to save Ted Van Dyke for last, if that's okay. And I'd like for all of our other guests who are here for public comment to please step forward. You know, I'll tell you what, it's almost like a race to the podium. You're welcome to come up as quickly as you can. There is no preferential treatment here. Whoever is interested in coming forward for public comment, you have an opportunity now to join us. You have 3 minutes to share with us your public comment. And to be clear, friends and colleagues, look, we're all residents of the city. We all care about our city and our city's infrastructure. So, you know, the 3 minutes is a bit of a guideline. You know, we've all had a day, I have to imagine. We, you know, nobody's wanting to spend 3 hours here. So if you'll take a few minutes to share with us your public comment, we will keep it moving from there. First up, we have.
Thank you. My name is Matt Waters, Chairman Neptune, members of the commission. Mr. Shoemaker down here is familiar with me. I live at 1516 Greenwood Street. I was here this morning speaking before the Planning Commission in support of my neighborhood's concerns about a zoning case. It's Z-50-21. It's in the 5 Points area. It's at the end of Roanoke Park. It is a proposed rezoning of a current zoning classification of a 1 acre parcel from IX3 to NX4, adding 20,000 commercial square feet of space in addition to 48 residential units at the end of Roanoke Park, so at the end of Greenwood Street along Bickett Boulevard. Mary Jo was here this morning as well and heard me speak on behalf of the neighborhood, and so she invited me here this evening, and I appreciate that invitation. The concern of the neighborhood about that project is chiefly the significant increase in vehicular traffic and visitors to the 5 Points neighborhood area in this proposed rezoning project. The project itself is a large scale, as I just mentioned, but it is also adjacent to 2 additional projects right there at the very end of Roanoke Park, which is the new Aja restaurant. That's Chidi Kumar and Paul Seiler. That restaurant opened up a week ago. That's a small space, but it's already a popular space and draws in a significant number of cars. As we saw this past Sunday, there was a significant increase in traffic around the park area. And then also Trophy Brewing, which is a very popular brewery around the state, and certainly in this city, is going adjacent to Aja next year. So all of that together, coming sort of at the same time, is increasing concern of the neighborhood. Now, Roanoke Park is the only park in the city that I'm aware of that allows toys. So it's a big draw to children. The streets around Roanoke Park, I live on Greenwood Street, as I said. It's a one-way street that travels from north to south. Cherokee is also a one-way street on the other side of the park. It travels from south to north. The one-way street signs are confusing and not often followed, particularly by vehicles, visitors to the area that are unfamiliar with our street system in 5 Points. So we often find cars traveling in the wrong way on either Cherokee or Greenwood. We find that's dangerous, particularly for the children who seem to understand the concept of a one-way street. So when they cross the street, they're usually looking only in the direction at which they're expecting cars to travel and not the other direction. The other issue with Greenwood and Cherokee streets around Roanoke Park, there are no parking signs on the interior of the park, so the edge of the park around those streets. Those no parking signs are not often followed either. There are cars that often park on the edge of the park, which is it's dangerous for a number of reasons, but chief of those reasons is if there are pedestrians in the park, when they exit the park, they have to go between cars, which makes it difficult for oncoming vehicular traffic to see people traversing back and forth between vehicles like that. There's a reason why the city doesn't want people parking on those streets. So Will here lives on Dare, so he's also familiar with the area. He has met with us in the neighborhood about this rezoning project. He's very familiar with the rezoning project. So we would like to see some changes made to the street system around Roanoke Park, perhaps some directional arrows painted on the streets seems to be a simple potential solution, better signage, ways to decrease vehicular traffic but increase pedestrian foot traffic or by bicycle or other means of transportation to help with those concerns. I'm sure I've taken up much more than 3 minutes, but I'm happy to answer any questions of the commission or listen to any other suggestions.
Well, first and foremost, Mr. Waters. Matt
Yes.
Waters.
Yes.
I want to thank you for taking the time to join us this evening to share the concerns on behalf of your community, your neighborhood. I'd also like to briefly acknowledge that when I first moved here over 10 years ago, it was to the 5 Points neighborhood, so I'm deeply familiar. Even today, though I may reside elsewhere in the city, I visit frequently Roanoke Park and, in fact, was a guest of Aja this weekend.
Okay.
So I can speak to firsthand, bearing witness to both the traffic, the parking, the pedestrian potential for, conflict with our vulnerable road users who are just trying to make their way through the neighborhood. Ultimately, I think this commission, it's safe to say, we are advocates and proponents for safer streets, and especially for those of us who are the most vulnerable in trying to navigate through those streets. As we continue to grow as a community, we are going to come across this sort of tension from time to time. In fact, we received an email, here again, from the neighborhood recently, where it was acknowledged that no one here is anti-growth, anti-development.
Right.
But as we navigate this together, we are going to have to identify solutions that see people made safer together as well. Okay.
Exactly.
So deeply appreciate you being here. I do want to take a quick moment to acknowledge the, neighborhood traffic calming sort of toolkit, if you will, that we have available to us. Has that been a conversation that you've been able to engage in at all since this morning when you first met or engaged with? Maybe Mr. Shoemaker could.
No, as Commissioner Neptune mentioned, so the neighborhood traffic management program is probably the right tool to evaluate and look at a number of the concerns as it relates to speeds and safety around that. So if you would reach out to my group, NTMP, it stands for Neighborhood Traffic Management Program, NTMP at RaleighNC.gov. There's various steps and processes that each street needs to go through, but without knowing all of them off the top of my head, we can talk in more specificity whenever you reach out, and we'll be happy to have that discussion so we can talk about next steps for whatever streets you have in mind.
I also want to, first, thank you, Mr. Shoemaker. I want to thank Commissioner Gellenbeck for extending this invitation to Mr. Waters to join us this evening. Always appreciate when we have a resident reach out to the commission following up with an invitation to join us here to share the concerns in person, if able. Ms. Gellenbeck, did you have a comment you want to make?
I do. First to say thank you again for joining us this evening. The reason why I invited him was because the residents were addressing a lot of their current concerns for the dangerous driving behavior that's going on in the neighborhood. And so I thought, well, we should be addressing that now because of the vulnerable road users that are already experiencing it. As that area does change, growth, population, commercial space, it will be bringing in drivers who are unfamiliar with the nuances of these roads. And what I found really interesting at when they presented at the Planning Commission is that the Planning Commission recognized that this is a transportation issue and that it doesn't fall in their district. And I thought, well, there was a representative from the DOT, and she said that when asked if the DOT is involved, she said no. And I felt like this is an opportunity for the city to collaborate across their departments when the rezoning is taking place to engage DOT in that capacity. But that, I know, is down the road. What I really wanted to do was address the current conditions that are there today, because the rezoning and the changing won't be happening for possibly 2 years. But we know that the Trophy has purchased that piece of property. We know how popular they are. I think this is a great opportunity for us to address active transportation infrastructure that induces ridership and walkability. I'm excited about the prospect of small business growth in that area. This is a concentrated neighborhood already, but that whole space from Atlantic Avenue down to Fairview Road to the 5 Points at Fairview Road and Oberlin, they're all scheduled for increased residency. And we have to invest in the diversifying our transportation system. And that's why I wanted you to come. That's why I want to bring it forward. I want to address the concerns that you have today and keep us in the loop for planning for the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Gellenbeck. I do want to also acknowledge briefly, I've probably visited Roanoke Park specifically 1,000 times with friends and families. Specifically, that's the key here. In other words, as that neighborhood has grown, I think the number of families in that neighborhood has grown exponentially. And so I'm certainly, again, sort of firsthand familiar with the number of kids who are just trying to run around and enjoy their lives, and which they should still be able to do, as other businesses and folks move into the community. So I appreciate this proactive effort to engage that conversation. And last but not least, I'll acknowledge that, I am familiar with the ownership of both Aja and Trophy Brewing, and I know that these are owners who are very much proponents of more walkable, bikeable communities, and I suspect they'll be partners with us in navigating this growth and development together. Another comment, Ms. Gellenbeck?
Yes, I do want to recognize that this is an older neighborhood, and so the streets are narrow. There are several property owners that do not have driveways, so on-street parking is a necessity. Like like the street that I live on, where the houses were built in the 1920s, it's often narrowed to a single lane as we navigate between, which is a good thing. We're not complaining about that because it reduces traffic speed. It's almost like a natural traffic calming, but that was a concern. So if we are looking at bringing in, inducing motor vehicle traffic to this space, we need to be cognizant the existing conditions, and it's even more important that we're inducing ridership and walkability. I know that those two roads that line Roanoke Park don't have sidewalks, and so the people walk in the street.
Yeah, it forces pedestrians onto the streets.
Yeah, so there's a lot going on, but I think this could become a, like a gold standard for how the city approaches these changes, because you can't hold back the ocean.
That's right.
Thank you. Any further comment from the commission? Hearing none, Mr. Waters, thank you
Okay.
again.
Thank you.
Deeply appreciate you.
All right,
Thank you.
Thank you for your time. Thank you.
Up next.
Hey, how's everybody doing? My name is Jason Kojak. I live with some other residents that showed up tonight, and we live on Edmond Street, which, to kind of give you a point of reference, is Brookside and Glasscock, in between there, and Conn Elementary. Not as eloquent, so I'll have a couple notes here, but you'll get the idea. Basically, Conn Elementary was rebuilt a few years ago, as many of you know, and as a byproduct, Brookside was changed to have no parking. In that time frame, the shopping center at the corner of Glasscock and Brookside, which has the bodega, Optimus Coffee, places that we all love, has gotten busier, similar to the 5 Points area, which, again, we all love. What we've run into is a lot of parents that park on Edmond Street to walk their children to Conn Elementary. And so we get a traffic jam down Edmond Street, which basically turns it into one road. I have two young children, and part of the issue is we don't have sidewalks either. And so because we live within a quarter mile of the school, there's no bus option. So we have to walk to school, right? And so what it's created is, because of the four-way stop at Glasscock, which nobody has patience anymore, they cut down Willow or Grace, the gravel roads, come down Edmond as fast as they can to feel like they're beating the four-way stop sign. And they're getting into the pinch point of all the parents that park there that don't live there to walk their kids to school, so they don't have to stand or wait in the bus line. I wait in daycare lines. I understand it. I get it, okay? And now, furthermore, there's been two projects that are approved. One is for 39 units right across from Edmond Street, and one is for 10 units, one lot over. And because of the missing middle, which I know this is not the time or the place, there's no parking requirements. And so we have gone to everybody we know at the city, from the transportation, everything, and we just get a circle. A circle. We can't help you, can't do too much. We'll look into it. The best solution we've heard so far is that they'll allow parking on Brookside, which is really just going to feed the multi-unit places that won't have enough parking when they're built. They did add speed bumps a couple years ago to Edmond Street, which did help, but they fly down there, and it really is, it's dangerous. It's just blatantly dangerous. And again, we're not against growth. We frequent those places, but it's really tough. I will say also, the city did just recently a traffic study, and we've been trying to get that done, and they did it the week after Conn Elementary ended school. And so I don't know what the results will look like, but I can tell you, if you drove down the week after, there weren't those parents parking there, nor was there that 7:45 to 8:30 or 3 to 3:45 speed. So again, I think we don't know the best solution there. I think the four-way stop at Glasscock and Brookside, a push button pedestrian, just, with a flashing light like they have at Frank Street for the school, would go a long way. I think, if you add parking to Brookside, but you create blind spots. There's fences on both sides, and I understand you can't have the perfect solution, but I'm telling you, a kid is gonna get hit. It's tough. It's tough. So that's my piece. Any questions or?
Mr. Kojak?
Yes.
Again, thank you for being here tonight to share the concerns on behalf of our community and neighborhood near Brookside Drive. I want to acknowledge that I've had many a friend live in that neighborhood. I have visited countless times. I've hosted small house parties in that neighborhood. So deeply grateful for you being here this evening to share with us, again, the concerns. I do see that we have Brookside Drive safety initiatives on our agenda for this evening, so I imagine we'll be picking this up in a moment. So perhaps we could withhold maybe immediate comment until we have a chance to kind of get an update on where we are with the current approaches with the city. But ultimately, you're speaking to a commission that hears you loudly and clearly and is going to be an advocate for safer streets in your community.
That's great. Well, my children and I appreciate it. So thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Helen Tart. I live 611 Monroe Drive, which is right down the street from where he was talking about. And I got an email from the people that live on Brookside who have been very concerned about the two developments that were just mentioned. And are y'all going to be talking about Brookside? Is that what I understand?
That is correct. Ms. Tart?
Yes.
That's correct. So on our agenda for this evening, we have a presentation by city staff on Brookside Drive safety initiatives.
Okay, so should I wait until then to?
Well, I think you are welcome to share with us your comment now.
Okay, because that little stretch of Brookside is, at one point there was parking along there, and I think they took it away because people kept getting their cars totaled because people come over the hill from Wake Forest Road and go through that light, and they're just going way too fast. We've talked to Corey Branch, and when we were standing there in front of the lots talking to Corey Branch, somebody went around somebody that was going too slow on the opposite side. I mean, it's crazy. So anything that y'all can think of to do to slow people down. There, at Brookside and Glasscock, there used to be a stop sign. I mean, a signal, a stop signal. Well, this was 20 years ago, but maybe that's what we need again to slow things down. But I think that if allowing parking again might, and just painting the parking spaces on the street, because before there weren't any. And so, because when these people move in, they're going to have parties, you know, and I haven't looked at the plans for the 39, but the one for 10 is they've got 2-car garages, but no other parking, which is a good thing, less impervious surface. But so it maybe that is an option, and I know that there is a location on Person Street where they don't have a stoplight, but they have little, there's 2 lights up here and a light down there, and that you might put one of those up at Glasscock or Brookside, whichever one the traffic people think is best. Okay.
Ms. Tart, thank you. Thank you. Thank you for joining us this evening to share with us, again, the concerns on behalf of the Brookside corridor. I would encourage the commission to take notes because, again, we'll hear later on this evening in the agenda with regard to current initiatives underway. I think, Ms. Alley, you have a quick comment?
Commissioner Neptune, Chair Neptune, excuse me, sir. Can I suggest that we move this item up to the front of the agenda in consideration for our public comment guests?
If there's no objection from the commission, I think that's a totally fine suggestion. That's a great suggestion. Thank you, Commissioner Alley. We will, for those who are interested, we're going to bump up the Brookside Drive presentation to the top of the agenda as soon as we are finished with our public comment. Do we have anyone else with, oh?
Hi.
Hello there, good evening.
Hi, I'm Becky Coggins. I live at 709 Edmond, and we're neighbors, and we're all deeply concerned, seriously worried about the amount of traffic and the lack of parking in the area. I'm thinking of, even if we allowed parking on that street, that would only accommodate the people who are already living there, you know, and walking. It'll just keep those people off of our street, which is about this narrow. It's barely big enough for a fire engine to get through if it needed to, maybe not even. So we have concerns about our own homes and families, as well as the children in the neighborhood. We probably have 30 little kids on our street. Some of them are not, quite a few aren't even in school yet, but they will be, and walking. And all around our whole neighborhood back there, people walk, and it's not safe. People fly down Glasscock already. They fly down Brookside. And I can't imagine how 39 units, say even if they just had one person in them, but less if they had two, or squeezed in 3 or 4 people, like a lot of young people do just to afford a place to live, or people of any age, really. That's a lot of vehicles. And reality is the buses aren't going to take these people where they want to go. I mean, I'd love it if they did, but routes as they aren't going to accommodate it. It's not convenient. People don't only go into town, they go out, way out, to work too. So I would hope that the commission would take serious thought to allowing and I guess facilitating a better way for people. I don't know what it is. Maybe they'll go down and park at Oakwood Dog Park. But anyway, thank you for the time.
Well, and Ms. Coggins, just briefly, I want to thank you for joining us this evening. Again, I think for residents in our community to understand that the concerns that we're facing as we continue to grow as a community, the best thing we can do is to speak up and to speak out about it so that we can do something about it. And I think there's a truth in that, you know, we're not going to engage in sort of knee-jerk decision-making here this evening. This will be studied. This will be considered. You know, we're going to engage the various stakeholders, residential, business, you know, thinking about our kids, our families, considering, you know, certainly the safety, emergency services that have to navigate through neighborhoods to tend to, you know, emergencies that happen from time to time. In other words, you know, I imagine, in addition to hearing this evening about what's currently underway, I wouldn't be surprised if this landed in our planning committee for further consideration and study to consider all the options that might be on the table. And there may be, in fact, another opportunity in the months ahead, hopefully not too many months, ideally, but in the months ahead for folks from the neighborhood to reconvene either here or in a smaller setting with the planning subcommittee to explore what some of those ideas look like and then offer feedback at another time. But either way, you being here tonight, that's what's going to get the effort started. So
Thank
deeply
you.
appreciate you.
We appreciate it.
Thank you.
And we'll look forward to hearing what your committee has to say.
Thank you.
I'd like to say a couple more things, please. Hi, I'm Kevin Coggins. I also live at 709 Edmond Street, and I'm really not here to say much about the project, just to give you a little information. Edmond Street towards Tonsler is a very common bicycle route, as people do not want to ride their bicycles on Glasscock Street because it's narrow enough and has plenty of traffic as is. So, you know, I would hope that, you know, as narrow as it is already, and a lot of people on bicycles use that to cut through either to the Greenway or home or whatever, and then also off of Brookside and then up, I can't remember the name of the street now, but up to Person Street. So I want to just make sure that you know that there is a lot of bicycle traffic in that area. One other complication that, or potentially a bit of information that could be important to this group is I understand at the intersection of Glasscock and State Street, that St. Aug property, I believe that has moved over into private hands, and there's going to be at least 300 units that are going to be put in that space. I'm sure there'll be plenty of room for parking for those people, but that's another large amount of cars that will be traveling down Glasscock Street to Brookside and will impact that area as well. Anyway, that's all I got to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Coggins. Good to see you. Any further public comment? I think that our friend, which of course everyone here is a friend, to be clear, but I do believe our friend Mr. Ted Van Dyke is last up on public comment. Is that right? I think that is correct. We will proceed with Mr. Van Dyke. And I think he has a special presentation for us this evening.
I don't know if it's queued up. I did send some slides. I don't know if we're able to pull them up, and I will be brief because it sounds like you guys have a lot to talk about tonight.
I don't have anything. Did you send it to my email?
Yes, a couple times.
I was copied on that email, so there should be something, hopefully,
Just a set of PDFs.
if we take a moment. So I'm going to speak about why Mr. Van Dyke is here for just a second to offer time for Ms. Godwin to pull it up. But there was an email that I was copied on with regard to, I want to say, 6 Forks Road and the improvements, some would say, that are being suggested for 6 Forks. I believe Mr. Van Dyke, who, if I'm not mistaken, is an architect by background and training. We always appreciate our architects. A lot of attention to detail. They do maintain. I have known my fair share. Give me just a moment. I see here Miss Godwin, Barbara Godwin, Nick Neptune, copied on an email this afternoon, 4:48, but maybe, if not, perhaps.
Too big?
Could you forward it to me?
I will forward it to you right now again.
Well, this is taking place, if you don't mind, Mr. Chair. I'll just give a little intro so we don't take too much of your time tonight. I did get interested in the 6 Forks widening. I'm interested in a lot of what's happening in our city roadway-wise. I've got a little bit of a different lens to share with you tonight. One, of course, we know the project is $57 million over budget. That's double the original projected cost for 2 miles of highway. I'm also a member of the Wake County Planning Board, and we've recently been brought information that Wake County is doing a comprehensive tree canopy study. There'll be a very sophisticated, interactive website soon available where we can study basically every tree in the county, see what the effects of projects that we've never been able to do before on our tree canopy are. So I started to put chocolate and peanut butter together a little bit when I started to look into the 6 Forks widening. It turns out that the right-of-way currently is about 90 feet. That's 2 lanes each way plus a turn lane and then a 5-foot sidewalk and some additional material. That slide behind you is just as good. When you look down at 6 Forks Road now, there's an incredible mature tree canopy all the way along the street. Some of these trees were planted 50 years ago. Some are older. You've got Carroll Middle School. So there's 3 things that I can forward you this presentation that I'd like us to consider as we start looking at this widening. Not just this widening, but as we move forward with all our transportation projects in Raleigh. One is heat island. NC State University has done a great study of heat island effect. The map of the heat islands of our city might as well be a map of our major roads. The hottest temperatures and the dirtiest air is all around our roadways. What are the ways that we can mitigate that hot temperature and dirty air? Trees. A lot of the trees that are in our right-of-ways now are doing yeoman's work, and it's really sad to see what's happening in West Raleigh with the Beltline widening. We really not only have created an incredible heat island, we've eliminated much of the natural flora that was mitigating the damage. So whether or not we get to see my slides tonight, I'll send them to you. In a nutshell, I'd like our city to take another look at these projects. This one in particular, this is going to be a 135-foot right-of-way when it's completed. Much of it has been justified as a bike ped project, but I'd like to point out a couple things about that. If you turn a 4-lane plus a turn lane road into 6 lanes plus a turn lane, and then you widen it further with bike and ped facilities, which I'm all for. I rode my e-bike to this meeting. And in so doing, you eliminate all of the trees and bushes that have been filtering that air for the existing residents. Bear in mind that the effects of any highway-style roadway like that are going to be felt for about 500 feet on either side of the roadway. 500 feet. And that's early onset dementia. Everybody knows about asthma, some kinds of cancers. All of these things that are coming off this roadway are going 500 feet in either direction. The best way to mitigate that is trees and brush. So my point for tonight is let's take another look at this thing. the way we can save ourselves $57 million and maybe more is by asking our DOT to stay in their lanes, don't widen this road. In fact, because of the pandemic, traffic counts on Six Forks now are less than they were in 2017. The highest recorded traffic count was in 2003. So despite all of the development, maybe because of it, all of the intensive development around North Hills, traffic and trips are decreasing in that corridor. There's really no reason to put a 6-lane highway through that part of our town. And so why I'm here today to talk to you is, one, to gain your sympathy and your attention to this, but also I think there's a point at which we as bike and pedestrian advocates have to weigh some costs as well as advantages. I'd love to see those bike paths separated from pedestrians, separated from this, separated from that, but not at the cost of all the flora and fauna that are protecting our environment and cooling and cleaning our air. I just don't think it's a fair trade-off, and I don't think there's any place anybody's going to want to ride a bike when the project's done. So I think we can all advocate for perhaps within that 90-foot right-of-way, a 10-foot multi-use path that would still fit. It's a 5-foot sidewalk today. Let's get a 10-foot multi-use path. I'm on the greenways all the time. I think we as civilized people can manage the walkers and the bikers on an urban pedestrian path and bike path if we really need to, if it means that we could save around 8 acres of trees in that 2-mile corridor and hundreds of millions of dollars. They're going to have to tear up over 400 parking spaces. They're going to have to demolish buildings. They're going to have to rebuild every curb, every gutter, every stormwater. There's just a tremendous cost to this project. And I'd like to, for those of us who think that this is the right direction, to maybe say that, yes, we are in favor of bike and ped, but there is a point at which the cost is too great. So I thank you.
Mr. Van Dyke, thank you again, as with all of our residents, for coming forward tonight, taking the time, the energy to share with us your thoughts and your concerns. Six Forks Road, and I'll just also acknowledge, I have tried to send your presentation to Ms. Godwin, and for whatever reason, I think because the file may be too large, it is not making its way. I've noticed that multiple times, that error coming up on my end, and so I want to just acknowledge that, number one. Number two, I think that Six Forks, number one, we need to identify where we are within that project right now to maybe better understand what our options might be to participate in maybe offering up other potential approaches. Do we happen to know right now offhand where we are with the Six Forks Road project? It looks like Mr. Ritchie. We have a special guest in the audience. And Mr. Van Dyke, don't go too far. Mr. Ritchie.
So as Mr. Van Dyke alluded to, and as y'all probably recall, we did do an update to council earlier this year on the Six Forks Road project, and they did at that point authorize it to move into real estate. The most recent bond update, we did identify that projected gap. So we are working with our partners in engineering services to kind of look at options. We are due to come back to council later this fall with some updates on that. Part of that will be aligned with the closure of this current fiscal year, because I think council is going to want to see what the fiscal outlook looks like and what funding may be available. But we are looking at what those options are, noting the projected budget gap on that project.
So is there still room for this commission to engage those options in relation to the concerns we're hearing this evening?
So certainly, I think taking a look at what those options are, we are going to start putting some of those together, and I'll be more than happy to bring those back as we identify those when we come out of the break and kind of see what staff is potentially looking at to get some feedback from the commission and the public.
So even more specifically, for instance, we're going into a recess this July. We won't reconvene until August. Is there capacity for staff to come back before Planning Committee in August to engage in some of these options and review?
Sure, we'd be happy to.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Ritchie. Ms. Gellenbeck?
Yes, thank you. I'm going to ask a silly question.
There's no silly questions.
I think so too. But is there any potential for change in the design that's being proposed? Or is it set in motion and you're just looking for the money?
So I would say, based off the gap that we have, that everything is on the table. Because trying to find roughly $60 million
So that's a
is-
blessing.
Yes.
Because.
Yeah. And that was a great question, Commissioner.
Okay, thank you. If I'm, Pierre, maybe you can correct me, but I think you were the one who informed us on the study that anticipated the volume of traffic that was going to be on Six Forks Road, and they estimated that it was higher than what actually the count was. Is that true? Does that ring a bell for you?
Mr. Caruso.
That was, yeah.
Oh, thank you, Jeff.
I remember
Because this is a really important point, so thank you, Mr. Van Dyke, for bringing that up, that they're building the road based on statistics that they weren't accurate in the first place. So I gotta say that, we should be investing in an integrated mobility system and not expanding motor vehicle traffic. Because it wasn't accurate in the first place, and I don't think that's going to be accurate again in the future. I think there's so much that has shifted through the pandemic. The virtual travel is influencing it greatly. And so I believe full-heartedly that the trees are the lungs of the earth, and that we should be protecting it. So I do plan to talk to council about that as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Gellenbeck. Mr. Ritchie? Well, thank you for being with us tonight and reaffirming that there's still room to play and participate in these suggested improvements for Six Forks Road. And then last but not least, thank you again to Mr. Van Dyke. And we will make sure that your presentation, your slides, are received by the commission. Like I said earlier this evening, I too had an issue trying to get these to Ms. Godwin, so we'll be sure that everyone does receive it. Miss
Chair
Sally.
Neptune, because of the political nature of this, I know it's going to be discussed at council a lot, and one thing we've struggled with as a commission is how to insert ourselves in a timely fashion into those conversations. And so I don't know what you and Vice Chair Caruso's schedule is in talking with our council liaison, but it might be worth offering BPAC as a resource, or simply, restating some of. I don't know if we've ever taken official votes, or it's probably been quite some time since we've had an actionable item on Six Forks before this commission. I know that we discussed it, the budget shortfall as part of our bond review at the retreat. But anyways, I think it might be worth, we can talk about it in planning committee, but council will never hear those comments.
Well, Commissioner Alley, first of all, thank you for sharing that observation in terms of let's say, the iterations of commissions and councils past. I would like to acknowledge that our council liaison, Councilmember Harrison, has in fact been in touch with this commission within recent weeks to kind of keep us apprised as to where council is in engaging this item. And so I think that we have a very healthy relationship currently with our council, and we will continue to engage as appropriate. And, of course, in a timely manner, so that hopefully, again, the concerns that are being raised by our residents and other stakeholders to this commission, they're relayed appropriately to council. Mr. Ritchie?
Yeah, and certainly I think as we start to bring some of those options that we look at back to the planning committee, certainly those can be things that we report out when we do follow up with council later on this fall.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, with that, I believe we are prepared to conclude public comment and transition into our first presentation of the evening, which we've kind of reshuffled the order here. We're going to do the Brookside Drive Safety Initiatives presentation first. Mr. Shoemaker.
Sorry, the banner is blocking and I can't see the. Can it go away?
Need some help?
Yeah, I do need some help. This is embarrassing.
Well, while we sort through these technological difficulties, I do want to again thank the residents and stakeholders in the audience who have taken the time to join us tonight. As I often say, As was shared with me many years ago, closed mouths don't get fed. So if we don't speak up and say something, holy moly, how do we know what to do? So again, deeply appreciate all of you who are here with us this evening. It looks like Mr. Shoemaker is good to go. No more fill time. Here
Yes. Thank you, Barbara, for helping me out with technical support. So, again, my name is Will Shoemaker, and I oversee the City of Raleigh's Mobility Development Group. I'm the supervisor that oversees a number of programs that include the Bike and Ped and the traffic calming. So, want to go and do a quick update on Brookside Drive, look at the current conditions, as well as look at some current efforts that we're actively evaluating. The community reached out to us in 2020 asking for a speed limit reduction for Brookside Drive. We reduced it to 30 based on the street classification and the volumes. 30 is a recommended speed, so we were able to enact that in late 2020. The neighborhood came to us again in 2023 and said we want to look at what that impact has had. We found that an April study found the 85th percentile, meaning that 85% of vehicles drivers are going at or below the speed was about 34 to 36. So generally within about 5 miles an hour of the 30-mile-an-hour speed limit. We pulled a crash history for the previous 3 years. We found that there was one speed-related crash in the previous 3 years. And Brookside has an average volume of just under 6,500 average daily trips. So based on these conditions, it is not eligible for traffic calming action through the Neighborhood Traffic Management Program. But that does not mean that we as a city do not have other avenues to provide different levels of relief that hopefully achieve similar goals. So one thing that we're looking at, a number of the public comments alluded to parking evaluations. So that is absolutely something that we've been looking at. I was taking notes through a number of these public comments. So if I jump around just a little bit, it's trying to work in what you said into the presentation that I had not originally planned. So the original temporary parking on the right side that exists today was a relic of Conn Elementary, the carpool before the standards. The Wake County Public Schools did not require carpool queuing on site, and that was on the public right-of-way. So there was a long need during pickup and drop-off for that right turn lane. So that's why it was time-restricted parking allowances, but it was largely because of the school. After Conn redeveloped, they have largely dissipated that need for the public right-of-way queuing of cars. It does spill out slightly, but it's really a whole lot better. It's usually peak. It's just a handful of cars. So what we're looking at doing, so this is through the Vision Zero group as well as the parking division and our signs and markings group, they are all actively looking to reconfigure the existing laneage and right-size those turn lanes to achieve a number of positive effects. Talking with the community, we heard that a lot of people were using, maybe not a lot, but some aggressive drivers were using that right turn lane as a passing lane. So we wanted to look at on-street parking, putting a parked car there would definitely take that away. But then looking at the characteristics of the neighborhood, virtually everyone that exists today has long driveways, so we were worried that parking utilization would not be used and this parking lane would still be used for the same passing lane. And then a lot of neighbors reached out with concerns related to the two missing middle developments on the west side and the lack of parking that they were going to provide for the people that were moving into those homes. And so that sparked a discussion between the parking division to shift the temporary time-restricted parking that exists today to the west side in front of those missing middle developments, keep and right-size the carpool queue to get into Conn Elementary, and then shrink and right-size the right turn lane down at Glasscock. And this will do a number of things. One, it will put parking, again, right where the new residents are going to be, so that hopefully there will be more than enough provided, plus right here that they won't filter out further into the neighborhood. By eliminating that right turn lane, we have eliminated the ability for people to use that as a passing lane. And by having a situation where it's very likely that on-street parking will be utilized, plus reducing it down to 2 through lanes, we've eliminated the ability for that passing behavior, as well as it's going to feel a lot tighter, so it creates that friction that's going to act as a form of traffic calming. I don't know if that 20 to 23 spaces is accurate. That was done by our parking division. We're looking at that shift and how long that has to be, that transition, that little jog you see about a third of the way down. That's going to dictate how much space we actually have, but we're actively working and doing the math to figure out what that is. So again, it's shifting the parking, making it permanent parking, putting it somewhere that we feel like it's going to be used fairly regularly, that creates that friction to slow down drivers, as well as eliminates the turning lane that's being used improperly as it exists today. Another thing that we've heard is that the intersection of Glasscock and Brookside is not ideal for pedestrians. So the Vision Zero and myself have been researching different ways to increase that pedestrian safety, and one thing that we have found is turn calming. A number of cities have done that, and we have been talking with them, trying to figure out best practices, but it looks like this is a good candidate for that. And how this works is effectively it puts a speed bump kind of right here on the front of the nose and behind the crosswalk, so that it forces drivers, instead of making a fast swooping turn, they have to go further out and make a closer to 90-degree turn, and there we go, which then takes pedestrians out of the blind spot, out of that bar in your car. It squares it up a lot closer, so they're looking straight at pedestrians, as well as it forces drivers to make that turn more slowly. So a Chicago installation, who we've talked to a whole lot, found that there's an increase to 94% of drivers yield to pedestrians after this type of installation is installed. 97% of drivers are choosing to go in the safe zone and not cutting through as they were before. There was a 24% reduction in left turn crashes, as well as a 24% reduction in total crashes at intersections with turn calming. One thing I do want to mention about the signal that was mentioned, that was removed in association with the Glasscock Streetscape project. Warrants were not met, so that means that there were not enough cars to go through, going through the intersection to warrant a signal. So we in the Transportation Department recommended an all-way stop conversion, which is, by the characteristics of how that works, a safer intersection than a signal, because all directions are supposed to stop. So it's kind of like a double safe, where if there's somebody does run it, everyone else is supposed to stop. So there's a lot of redundancy and safety built into that, as well as if you're coming down Glasscock or coming down Brookside and you have the green, you have no incentive to slow down whatsoever. So from a safety, intersection safety perspective, the always stop is really the gold standard for safety, and especially in high pedestrian areas. And then you did mention Edmond Street. We did have, it was very unfortunate that was after school. We had to hurry up and get something, so we had data for this study. So Edmond Street did have a traffic calming project that was, I believe, in 2017, 2019, I think it was installed in that range. But the study that we just completed, the 85th percentile, again, meaning that 85% of cars are going at or below this speed, was right at 21 miles an hour on that street. It had an average of 17 vehicles per day, and we found that there was zero speed-related crashes in the previous 3 years leading up to the evaluation of today. And to put that into context, we did a 6-month after study, so this was in February 2020, so pre-pandemic. The 85th percentile speed was 23.85 miles per hour in the 25-mile-an-hour zone, with an average volume of 165 vehicles per day. So relatively close to what we found just a couple weeks ago, but certainly school can impact that. But from the historical data where school was in session versus now, is very close. So I'm not sure if there's going to be a huge difference, but that's something we can absolutely look at when school gets back into session.
Mr. Shoemaker, thank you for the presentation. Are there any thoughts, questions from the commission? Ms. Alley.
Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Shoemaker. And to the neighbors, I've lived in this neighborhood for 20 years. My kids are fifth graders at Conn Elementary, deeply invested in the same concerns that you all have. A couple of observations. I think the speed limit reduction on Brookside has been helpful, but I think a reiteration for this commission, we talk about 20 is plenty. And the feeling of a car going 30 or 35 when you're standing directly adjacent to that is feels really hostile and really dangerous. And so while we might not be meeting warrants for any kind of intervention, excuse me, while we might not be meeting any warrants for intervention, I do think it feels quite hostile out there. I've been out there with RPD and the vice principal of the school who were concerned enough to meet at the intersection of Frank Street at school dismissal one day, and it's been a challenge to get crossing guards there, but RPD has run some kind of speed traps there in the morning, caught some fellow school parents, and you know, folks trying to start and end their day quickly by getting over to Capitol Boulevard. So I do think, you know, maybe the speed limit reduction to 30 wasn't enough. You know, it might be helping, but it's a really uncomfortable feeling place to be, even if they're not accidents. I think it's preventing people from using the street as cyclists, as walkers, and certainly, you know, my kids cross that street without a grown-up every day. In fact, we were going to have the city's Bike to School day was going to come from Lions Park down Edmund Street and turn onto Brookside and go in the front door of Conn, and it was deemed too dangerous, right? So I guess, you know, the fact that we couldn't do it might make our point, that it felt really way too bold to let children bike down that road. So, and further intervention I think that we could look at is at the four-way stop. I think it might be useful to prevent to prevent the turn lanes at the four-way stop. People are rolling through it. So right now there's one, I think it's shown even in the intervention, that would be turning.
That was just a graphic. That was not Brookside whatsoever. So that was two 4-lane roads meeting. So I just want to clarify that that was not Brookside.
I think this is the one that was where it was showing where more parking might be added. That there's continues to be a right turn lane. See the orange? Mm-hmm. I'm not sure that you need that turn lane. It's making it an unsafe. People are rolling through it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, we can certainly take a look at that.
And also to the extent that we could prevent people from taking a right turn going westbound on Glasscock to northbound Brookside. That's where that leg of the intersection is where a lot of kids are crossing in the morning. And then finally, I'm all for on-street parking being used to provide that friction and slow down the road. But correct me if I'm wrong, but Brookside is slated in the bike plan for a striped bike lane. And so we're going to end up having, not just here, but I think citywide, a good bit of conflict in use of curb space, which is kind of a sign of a vibrant city. So it's not, you know, necessarily a problem. But are we installing parking only to have a fight to uninstall parking near, does anybody recognize this, near multifamily housing? This has been a concern that the commission has had over the past 6 months over towards NC State. So wondering if you all had considered putting in the bike lane now as part of our traffic and safety interventions.
That was certainly a discussion when we were first at the whiteboard looking at different ideas, because it is part of the bike plan to have bike lanes at some point in the future. Weighing the concerns that we were hearing, it seemed overwhelmingly that the neighbors were concerned about parking spilling over to the neighborhoods. So that was why we prioritized this plan, because there are a lot of immediate benefits. Mm-hmm. But it certainly does set up conflict in the future, that when Brookside gets resurfaced and we can restripe, or whenever a standalone bike project comes along, we would have to reevaluate that curb space.
Yeah, I share the concern about, you know, how these missing middle projects are going to affect on-street parking. And to some extent, I think it's great that they're not building excess impervious surface. It'd be interesting to see, you know, there have been a couple projects of similar scale going up over closer towards New Bern. And I wonder if there's been any evaluation of the impact on on-street parking in those spots. You know, we tend to, myself included, overestimate the parking concerns and the traffic concerns of new development. And sometimes they don't necessarily bear fruit. So I just think it'd be worth kind of checking our assumptions on some similar projects and see, you know, how much of a conflict are we actually setting ourselves up for.
We can certainly work with the parking division, see what data they have, and if
Thanks.
we don't have any, get some.
I appreciate that.
Thank you, Ms. Alley. Mr. Caruso?
Thank you. First I would like to echo Commissioner Alley's comment about the right turn lane there in orange. I think it would definitely be beneficial to, maybe extend the park, if we have parking, extend the parking down further. I think there is a driveway cut, so I have to figure that out. But just having parking all the way down instead of that right turn lane and just having a single lane with kind of all movements should help kind of create a little bit of traffic calming where, you'll have a little bit of a backup, kind of intentionally creating a small amount of congestion so that people don't just roll through the intersection. So if I'm understanding this correctly, so this would be kind of the proposal where you would have the two, and then the blue, you would keep the current right turn lane that goes into Con.
Correct. So at the peak, there's still a handful of cars that roll out, so we don't want to completely eliminate that. But it would be our Safe Routes to School and Vision Zero team have gone out and done site visits and feel that this is the appropriate size to capture those.
Okay. And can you explain why Brookside doesn't qualify for further treatments under the traffic calming program?
So the major reason is the NTMP has a 6,000 vehicle per day cap.
Okay.
So it exceeds that volume cap, and it's acting as a thoroughfare. That also being said, the two metrics that we have for streets to qualify, we have to have an 85th percentile speed of 5 miles an hour or greater than the speed limit, or there has to be 2 speed-related crashes in the previous 3 years. So Brookside is right at that, and probably depending on which day we evaluate, it's either right below or right above it. So right now, it really does not meet the intent of it if you take of a traffic calming project, if you take away that 6,000 cap. So there are a number of different things that are going against that.
Okay. And so I assume we're not looking at any other, we're only looking at this 2-block section here. We're not looking at any other treatments or plans for any of the other sections of Brookside, right?
No,
Okay.
not at this time.
Mr. Caruso, Ms. Bravo Taylor.
Yeah, so I wanted to just voice a concern related to just looking at Brookside in a neighborhood like this where we do have so many, where you have a couple of tight streets, and we have already heard some citizens today tell us about how people are, rerouting themselves. It feels like this is one intervention in one place will have a ripple effect in the neighborhood. So it feels difficult to hear that that it's sort of both exceeding and kind of under the neighborhood traffic management program. It doesn't feel like it would quite be a comprehensive intervention to just address the one street, and that maybe the city really needs to think about some of these tight growing neighborhoods a little bit more holistically, because treating one street affects all of the other streets sort of inevitably. So it would be, maybe it's a thing to think about when we're thinking about what this intervention is at Brookside.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Bravo Taylor. Ms. Alley, then Mr. Caruso.
One project I think that we should consider when we're looking at this stretch of Brookside is the roundabout that's going to go in at where the Circus Burger was. And I'll be interested to see, well, I don't know. Do you all have any thoughts on whether or not that might impact travel speeds or travel volumes? I mean, the flow should be more consistent, I guess, from a roundabout. But have you all been party to that
So it's
project?
one of those that people are almost impossible to predict.
Yeah.
And I think I understand that some ways that we address problems can be frustrating, but it's also because people are almost impossible to predict. So we would love to go to a more progressive model, but a lot of these things are what is happening now and how can we address it instead of just guessing that if we do this, it might pop up here. That's certainly something that we know is coming. And we really don't know what that's going to do to take that to the next level. If it changes how Brookside is used and dramatically drops volumes, then we can look at further speed reductions. We can look at traffic calming if the speeds and so it's really us saying that the neighborhood traffic management program can't do something now does not mean that in a year and 5 years that as Raleigh continues to grow and use patterns change that we can't do something then.
Yeah, that makes sense. There are a couple of I think the roundabout project is going to create a couple of gaps. It'll start narrowing the sidewalk gap, but not eliminating it on the west side of Brookside. Be great for y'all to advocate for that. And I don't know if it's if that project is going to be designed to accommodate any future bike lanes on Brookside as well. So just a plug in there, even if we don't know what it's going to do in terms of volumes and speeds, that we might be able to push to fill some gaps so that there are alternative ways to traverse that road. And finally, an observation about Edmond and parking there. I have, not in many years, but I have parked there. Even when the old con was there, people would park on Edmond and walk their kids. And in some ways, like, I appreciate that people are choosing to walk their children even a short distance to school. It would be better if they park at the dog park. But part of the challenge of that turn is because people are going so fast on Brookside, you have to turn quickly onto Edmond. Otherwise, you're risking getting rear-ended. And they are turning right into where cars are parking too close to the intersection, and there is no sidewalk, and there are these retaining walls, and it really is, all of Edmond feels dangerous, but that part right at the intersection is especially so. So I wonder if there would be any kind of physical device we could use to prevent parking close to that intersection, like even just as simple as like a bollard.
We can absolutely look at that. I mean, we already have parking prohibitions 25 feet in advance of all intersections. One happy coincidence with what is being proposed here is instead of crossing two, I'm going to guess 11-foot lanes, you're now only crossing one 10-foot lane. So it's going to dramatically shorten that left turn lane. So yes, if people are still going fast, you need to go, but you don't have to cross multiple lanes of traffic any longer if this gets implemented.
I mean, it seems hard to believe, but this is all an improvement. What is on the ground is an improvement of what was there 15 years ago. And so hard to see us continuing to take iterative steps, but the problem does persist. So.
Thank you, Ms. Alley. Mr. Shoemaker, I'm trying to understand the timeline for both this mix of current efforts versus what is in the pipeline.
Mm-hmm.
Could you help me just, again, better understand like where we are within all of that and the extent to which the commission can further engage some of these options and maybe help refine them a bit?
Well, certainly. So the first step is Rebecca Duffy is evaluating this concept. So it shakes out conceptually. She has to go out with her staff and do some measurements, do the calculations to determine what that shift looks like. That will determine how far it is, and then with the comments of can we remove the right turn lane down at the bottom, that does change things a little bit. So those things are currently moving forward. I don't think we have an exact timeline. With the comments about the bike lane versus parking, I mean, we could take that back and have a larger conversation and bring back a more fleshed out plan, I guess, in a future BPAC meeting and have further review.
Well, the response is appreciated because I think we're trying to strike that balance in recognizing that, we've got people who are trying to live today. And, we're not trying to wait for a crash to happen or for there to be a fatality.
Mm-hmm.
that then results in the NTMP being triggered. You hear what I'm saying? And I think that our professional city staff who's working full-time around the clock, I believe that you do understand that. But I think that, as a commission, we're trying to support and work with you in getting there, again, before the crash happens, before the accidents happen. And so, would it be possible for there to be some options presented before the planning committee in August? Is that a reasonable timeframe? So we have the entire month of July ahead of us, and then typically planning meets late August. Would it be possible for city staff to come before planning committee to kind of review some of these options and details a bit more thoroughly, especially in the context? I'm also reminded of the fact that, we're kind of talking about a very specific area, but again, echoing, I think, real concerns expressed earlier. We want to think about this as a part of a larger network, as a larger network of infrastructure. And so I think the commission would appreciate it if it's possible this August to maybe review some of these options and some of these items that are being considered, maybe in more detail. Is that reasonable?
So I'm going to speak for a lot of people that aren't me and say that is reasonable. But a month and a half, because we're going to have to engage with 2 to 3 different divisions within the city that aren't represented here tonight, but a month and a half to get a more fleshed out plan. I don't know if that's going to mean that we can immediately roll into implementation or anything like that, but we can definitely come back with something that's a little bit more real than what's shown here and at the planning committee meeting.
Well, and I think that, we're human beings, and we do recognize that, again, as city staff, human beings are working to address potential options. If more time is needed, I think that the commission would understand that. But again, there's this balance, right, of trying to move forward with a degree of urgency and creativity in creating safer streets for people who are trying to live today. And so if it's possible, I think the commission would appreciate seeing this item coming before the planning committee in August. But if additional time is needed, then I think, September would also be reasonable. But ideally, I'd love to see a fuller update on this by the time we get to the end of the year, if possible. So again, the timeline here that I'm proposing is that by August or September, before planning committee, we can review in a bit more detail not only this infrastructure, but sort of in the context of the larger network that we're trying to facilitate, some options that take into consideration the comments of both our residents who are here tonight and the commission. Again, that would be August or September. And then by the time we get to November, December, would love a fuller update as to where we are with all of this.
We can absolutely shoot for August, and if anything holds us up, we can work through you and reschedule. But we'll plan for August. Not to belabor the point, but I guess what do you mean by the broader context? I'm struggling to grasp what you're looking to see from that. 'Cause with specific action items, Brookside is a problem, parking spilling out of the neighborhood. We can take a look at that, but I don't know.
I think that's a conversation that will be had with planning committee.
Okay.
As far as the further consideration of not just this, let's say, node, but the consideration of this node in the context of the larger network that we're trying to facilitate in the city. Ms. Bravo-Taylor?
Just that it might be part of the conversation too about what is falling under neighborhood traffic management and what is not, because we've run into this a couple of times. So just curious about, hearing complaints about neighborhoods that don't quite meet our bar for whatever reason. Is our bar in the right place?
Mm-hmm. Speak on that now. So certainly a lot of what we have in place is about managing expectations. So if we can certainly lower the bar, and there will be a flood of streets, but that elongates the list. So effectively, we're telling people that yes, you qualify, you need help. It's going to be 10 years. So where we've set the bar, we feel that it's manageable. Where we're getting new streets, we're still finding streets that meet the criteria, but it's not overwhelming our resources. So to give too much history very quickly, the NTMP was put into committee for 2.5 years. During that time, we were not allowed to push any projects out, but the list came in, so we ballooned to over 200 streets. So we are now down to 107-ish, so we are digging ourselves out of that hole. So where we've set the bar now is we're finding the worst offenders, and we're trying to work that and minimize that list. And then once we get to a point where our head's back above water, we will absolutely lower that bar and change it so we can expand our grasp.
Thank you. Great to know.
I'd also like to echo the thanks and gratitude of this commission. Here again, this is where we want to recognize that city staff is comprised of human beings who are working around the clock as professionals as this city continues to grow. So again, deeply appreciate you. You've got the support of the commission, but the commission will also work to push with a greater deal of urgency to see improvements made to our streetscape. Ms. Gellenbeck.
Thank you. Yes, I have just a couple questions. Looking at the graph, does the orange lots, do they represent where the new multifamily
I
units
believe
are
so,
going
yes.
in? Yes. So you're considering on-street parking in front of those lots because of the new residents that you anticipate needing parking,
Correct.
right? Okay. What I wanted to share, what I wanted to ask is, will we be including any vertical delineators in this project that will guide the motor vehicle drivers in that space? And the reason why I ask is that Glenwood Avenue is a great example where there is on-street parking, but the residents don't park their vehicles because of the uncomfortable fear of their vehicles being damaged by reckless drivers. And potentially we could have the same scenario going on here where people opt to not park their vehicles here because the potential of them being damaged is bad. So will there be vertical delineators that are guiding drivers away from the parking spaces, and we don't want them to go back into that parking lane if it's left open? And so the delineators might work in guiding the traffic.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the big distinction between this proposal and Glenwood Avenue is that this will be permanent parking. There will be no time restriction. So, I mean, as it exists today, it's time restricted and no one's choosing to park there because it looks and feels like a travel lane. So that was the first point. I just kind of wanted to make sure that this will be permanent parking, not time restricted or time allowed. But absolutely there will be full MUTCD compliant markings, lane shifts, edge lines. I don't believe that we'll mark the actual parking spaces. I believe that's restricted for metered parking, but there will absolutely be markings to show the lane shift.
Okay. I can't tell you that Glenwood residents don't park on Saturday or Sunday when there is no restricted,
absolutely.
right?
And so we don't want it to look like
it really is about
yeah.
the perception of...
Oh, absolutely. So
right.
we want to change the perception. And again, this is not, we're not having this curb space pull multiple duties here. This is going to be permanent parking, so we can make it look like permanent parking as opposed to a dashed line down the side of the road that looks like it's 2 lanes of traffic.
Okay. Yeah, because paint on roads doesn't drive increased behavior
Absolutely.
that you're aiming for, right? So when you have this shift in the road near the green and the blue, will there be vertical delineators on that divider line so that the motor vehicle drivers will stay in their lanes instead of going over that painted line? And
so where we're at now, this is a concept, and
Thanks,
I can say
concept.
that it's going to be fully MUTCD compliant. We can take that to look at it.
Okay.
But I don't know. I
Okay.
mean, we don't know. This is just really just what we're looking at, and
No
we're
problem.
trying to put pen to paper right now.
has it ever been considered to convert the Glasscock Brookside interchange into a roundabout? I know that interchange has changed several times. My family lived in the area in the early 2000s. It was a four-way stop. It was a traffic light. It was removed. I mean, it's been constant change. Have you considered doing a roundabout in that intersection as well?
So presumably a neighborhood traffic circle would fit where we're not moving the curb lines. We can absolutely look at that as an option. The problem with that is that's a bigger ask, and it'll be a longer before we can implement, where some of these are more tactical and fast approaches.
We can't do a pilot project like we did during the Strollway, where we put a roundabout. We created the roundabout at an intersection.
So we absolutely could look at that. With that pilot project, I think the volumes come into play. There's 6,500 vehicles per day. If people are not doing this, it's going to tear it up very, very quickly, and it's going to lose all effect. So we're going to have to do something substantial.
Okay.
But we can absolutely take a look at something else as opposed to the term calming that we were originally looking at this intersection.
Okay, great. Because there's the implementations that have been done really hasn't created the results that the residents are feeling. And my last question is, we're not going past Frank Street with this project. It's kind of ends at the traffic light at Frank Street. So when the motor vehicle driver who's going north passes Frank, all bets are off, and they can resume increased driver speed. We're just doing it inside these 2 blocks instead of taking the project all the way to where the circus is.
I guess, yes, that's the scope of this. That's where people have told us we need to focus. We can certainly look. I mean, the laneage, I think, changes in the road widths. I mean, the concerns that were brought to us were the people using the right turn lane to pass and drive unsafely, and then the lane changes north of Frank's. So I don't know the road width off the top of my head. And again, without the need for parking, if we just change it to parking, we've just created dead space that maybe constitute aggressive driving. So again, we can absolutely take a look to see if taking something further up to Automotive Way up there is appropriate, but the context of the road does change at Frank's, which is another reason why I've stopped there.
Okay. This road, I think, is ideal for that safe routes to school designation. That when you so for the Vision Zero scope of things, we really should be identifying those streets that run along school property zones. And so, yes, they're concerned about increased need for parking, but what I hear is a concern for driver behavior. And so these roads, that are run along school systems, I think that they should be 25 miles per hour, 24/7. And the design should be to induce that. So when the drivers enter this space, they're not looking at what time of day is it, because I got to reduce. They just know that this is the way that you drive on this road all the time. And when you get past it, then you're going to hit a contributory road where you can increase your speed limits. And so that's really what I'm hoping to achieve in this project. And then we can expand it throughout the city, because safe routes to school is extremely important. I did participate in Conn Elementary's planning for the bike to school day. They had 2 routes. I recommended the other one because I don't feel safe enough guiding children along this stretch of road. And that's a shame, because it is a route to school. So thank you so much for your time.
Ms. Gellenbeck, thank you. I want to thank the entire commission for being engaged on this topic, especially our commissioners who reside in the area. I want to thank again our residents who have come through to acknowledge the challenges that they're living with right now. I also want to thank Mr. Shoemaker, who's been on the hot seat for about 30 minutes here. Again, I think that it sounds as if we have opportunity this come August or September to dive more deeply into the details of some of the options being considered, and then we will continue to move forward from there with urgency and creativity in creating safer streets for our community.
Can I ask a question of the city, just very general? Since we're moving into more of a metropolitan community, a lot of big cities, residents have to have a parking pass in order to park on the street in their neighborhood. And that becomes a deterrence of a lot of traffic and unwanted residents to park in neighborhoods that they don't live in. Has Raleigh talked about that just as an option of deterrence?
Yeah, so Raleigh, I can't speak about this with any level of clarity or authority. I just know that Raleigh does have a residential permit parking system that all, I think as it exists today, single-family homes can reach out and initiate that. So if you would like to pursue that, the parking division will be able to answer all your questions about that.
Okay, thank you.
Oakwood has it. Port of Oakwood
Okay,
closest to
thank
Parsons
you.
Street.
Thank you, Ms. Goodwin. Thank you, Mr. Shoemaker. Hearing no further comment or question from the commission, I believe we can relieve Mr. Shoemaker from the hot seat. Again, thank you.
Thank y'all.
Thank you, thank you. We appreciate you, your work, and your service to our community.
See you in August or September.
That's right, that's right, that's right. That is right. Well, it is 7:30, and we will proceed with our next presentation. I believe we have, is it Crabtree? Crabtree, is that up next, Miss Godwin?
That's right.
Oh, perfect. Hello. It's
Hi.
been a minute since
It
we've
has
had
been.
our friend, Mr. Nick Farr, if I'm not mistaken.
That's right. Yep.
Chris Nick Farr, good to see you.
Good to
Welcome
see you.
back.
Thank you. So I'm Chris Nickfar, one of the city's Greenway planners and with Parks, Recreation, and Cultural Resources, and I'm managing the Crabtree Creek Trail Alignment Analysis Feasibility and Improvement Project. I know that that is a mouthful. It's a pretty small focus project. I'm just going to give you an overview of what we're looking at and where it's going up until this point. So the purpose essentially is to improve the safety and comfort of users of the Crabtree Creek Trail as they cross Raleigh Boulevard at its intersection with Crabtree Boulevard. Currently, there is a narrow sidewalk on the side of Raleigh Boulevard. There's fairly high-speed traffic that uses that road, and the speed limit there is 45 miles an hour, but the lanes are pretty wide, so I'm sure there are plenty of people that go faster than that. In terms of clarity and where the trail is, we're limited on where we can place signage in this little section there, just because there is such little right-of-way. It's very constrained. And then once you actually get to the intersection, we do have quite a bit of signage there, but there are, you'll see, and I have some slides here that'll show the existing conditions and the challenges that we face around that. And just to provide some context of where we are within the city, the project is located between North Raleigh Boulevard, which is on the bottom right of the screen here, between Raleigh Boulevard and Capitol Boulevard, which you see to the north there. And this is also just northeast of Crabtree Boulevard. And I just want to point out the blue line on the screen there, sort of to the bottom left. That is the Pigeon House branch, and that's going to be important in some of these slides that I'm going to talk about in just a few minutes here. So just keep that in mind there. So this is a picture of the existing sidewalk that Crabtree Creek Trail users have to use to cross Crabtree Creek as they're walking along Raleigh Boulevard. The sidewalk is a 5-foot wide sidewalk, which would typically probably be okay in many other locations, but there's no barrier between the sidewalk and the vehicle traffic here or the edge of pavement. And then they're also constrained on the outside of the sidewalk with the guardrail for the bridge. So it's not very comfortable as a pedestrian. It's even less so when you're on a bicycle and you're elevated and you need a little bit more space. And then once you approach the intersection of Crabtree Boulevard and Raleigh Boulevard, there's just a large amount of space between where you can make decisions, and it's not really clear which way you're supposed to go. You can go a number of different ways. If you cross the intersection, you have to get to the trailhead on the left side of the screen there, which is on the south side of the intersection. And I have some markers here where you can see where our existing signage is, but you can also see what the limitations to that signage is as well. If you look sort of at the far right side of the intersection, there is a pedestrian directional there. It's quite a distance across the intersection, anyway, but then, especially in the summertime, we've had situations where those trees will grow. They'll sort of block that sign. So when you approach the intersection, it's not really that clear, even though we have signage there. You'll also notice that there's no right-of-way between that guardrail and the sidewalk, so the sign has to go behind the guardrail, which makes it even further away from a user's viewpoint or view shed. On this side of the intersection, we can really only put a confidence marker sign there just because, again, with the limitations of space for signage. So when we're looking at how we can improve this, we're looking at not only the experience at this intersection, but also potentially realigning the Crabtree Creek Trail so that it doesn't have to use the bridge on Raleigh Boulevard to cross Crabtree Creek. So if we're going to consider that, then we need to look at two things. We need to look at, one, is it possible to do a grade-separated crossing? So if the trail goes under Raleigh Boulevard and crosses the creek on the other side of the bridge, or if there's another location where it might be able to cross Crabtree Creek before it even gets to this point. So with that in mind, there are other recommendations from other plans or other improvements that are going on that aren't too far from this, and we figured we probably should take into consideration if we're looking at this corridor anyway. One of them is the recommendation to have a trail along Pigeon House Branch along Capitol Boulevard, and that would connect from the new park on the north side of downtown all the way up to the Crabtree Creek Trail. And that's a recommendation that's in the Capitol Boulevard study that was done in 2012, but also the more recently completed Greenway Master Plan. We're also aware that NCDOT is designing a new Capitol Boulevard bridge that goes over Crabtree Creek. So we thought we would look at that and see if maybe that's a possibility for us to cross over Crabtree Creek before we even get to this side of Capitol Boulevard and maybe go under. That option actually turned out not to be feasible for us. There just isn't enough space between the footer on the south side of Crabtree Creek, of that bridge, and Crabtree Creek itself. If you walk along Crabtree Creek underneath the Capitol Boulevard Bridge, you'll see on your side where the creek is, there's plenty of space, but if you look directly across, the footer of the bridge goes directly into the water. So there's not enough space for us to get under the bridge at that location. Some other things to keep in mind here, pay attention to that sort of orangish red dashed line. That's actually a sewer easement that's already sort of a straight line that parallels the Crabtree Creek Trail. It's already cleared. So that's something that we can consider. Highlighted there in the yellow is an existing greenway easement that's meant to accommodate the future Pigeon House Branch Trail if and when that gets built. And then you also see the blue line where Pigeon House Branch is itself. I should have probably mentioned this a little bit earlier, but the green segments of the existing Crabtree Creek Trail are the asphalt section. The orange sections are bridge structures. And the one that you see that is the longest that goes right into North Raleigh Boulevard is structure 104. And some of you might remember that that structure was out of service for a good amount of time back in the 2017, 2018 time period. It's a floating bridge. So it goes up and down as the water levels go up and down. But that particular year, we had 2 back-to-back storms that produced more rain than actual hurricanes. And it pushed the bridge up out of its moorings. And it didn't look very good, and it was out of commission for quite some time. So that's just something to keep in mind when we're looking at making improvements, and we want to try to make the system more resilient, especially as we have more frequent of these like high rain events and big storms that come through. So with all of that in mind, we've come up with 3 alternatives that we're looking at, and they're all shown here. The one that's in the red would actually cross Crabtree Creek just east of Capitol Boulevard. So even before getting to structure 104, and it would run along that cleared sewer easement, and it would connect into Crabtree Boulevard instead of Raleigh Boulevard, where there is a wider sidewalk and there's a little bit of space between the sidewalk and the vehicle traffic. That would put users right at the intersection where they could use the crosswalk there to go directly across the intersection of Raleigh Boulevard and Crabtree Boulevard. One thing also I should have mentioned earlier too is that we are focusing on near-term improvements that can be done to the intersection itself, so we don't have to wait for a realignment of the trail to actually make the location safer and easier to use. But back to the alternatives. Both alternatives 2 and 3 use the existing alignment and the existing structure 104 and just sort of reorient their connection to the intersection of Raleigh Boulevard and Crabtree Boulevard. Alternative 2 builds off of the existing raised portion of structure 104 right before you get to Raleigh Boulevard, and it moves south and would connect at the same point that alternative 1 would also to Crabtree Boulevard. Alternative 3 is the one that is the grade separation, and it would go underneath Raleigh Boulevard and cross back over Crabtree Creek once you get past Raleigh Boulevard. So as far as interim improvements, these are still being worked through. This is just an example of one of the improvement possibilities that could be put into place. I think that there is a protected median island there, wider crosswalks. There are single direction bicycle lanes going in each direction. Barbara and I actually spoke about this a little bit earlier today, and I think one of the alternatives that I didn't have until this week, which was why it's not included in this presentation, is having a shared use path on the west side of Raleigh Boulevard that would be 10 feet wide. So you wouldn't have the bike lanes in each direction, but all users could use that one facility that's on the one side. And that would serve users that are traveling west on the Crabtree Creek Trail and help them be able to get through this intersection. So talking about project schedule, we're actually sort of near the finish line. We're still working out some of the refinements on the recommendations. We'll be developing cost estimates and final recommendations in July, and then have a final project memo produced in August. I should also note that there aren't currently any funds associated or established for these improvements. This is just sort of like a initial phase of determining what the options are and what we can do, and identifying funding would come at a later time. So with that, I'll open up to any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Nick Farr. Ms. Alley?
Thanks for this presentation. I was particularly attuned to how inhumane you said 5 feet next to a high travel road is, and I think that echoes a lot of what our commission brings up time and time again. So thank you for showing us a concrete example of that. I live near here. We go to see our turtles down at the Greenway, and wanted to see if for the improvements to the intersection, I think those are much needed and looks like that could be a huge improvement. I was wondering if we could consider, or if they would help LPIs, leading pedestrian intervals, at that intersection. There's so much turn volume that even when you have the walk sign, there are cars zipping in front of you, sometimes at a fairly high rate of speed. So I'm wondering if that's something that we could take into account. I'm not sure if either of these are NCDOT roads or volumes or whatever, but it's a dangerous intersection. Yeah. I put a kid in front of me and hold on to them as we walk through, because there's not enough room to do it side by side once you get to the sidewalk. And then lastly, for the, especially for the grade separated one, some consideration of kind of continued safety improvements for the folks that are not going through this portion of the Greenway, but going to and from the Greenway. So for neighbors entering and exiting, and how each of these improvements would work for people coming down either Timber or, I forgot the name of the other road, that there's a couple streets that, Barksdale, thank you, Barksdale, and then trying to get onto and off of the Greenway through any of these interventions.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Alley. Mr. Caruso?
Yeah, so, I mean, I think, as you mentioned, the kind of connectivity here is very challenging with the kind of lack of space on the bridge and kind of in that whole section there. I guess my question is, and maybe it's more for Mr. Ritchie or transportation staff, is there any plans for a road diet on Raleigh Boulevard? I mean, I know kind of anecdotally the traffic volumes on that stretch north of Crabtree are, I have a hard time believing that they kind of necessitate the built environment that we have there today. There's virtually never high volume of vehicles there. So it's all. I mean, south of Crabtree, there's medians and stuff, so that gets challenging. But north of Crabtree, it's all paint. So I just wanted to know if there were any plans, kind of already, to do any type of road diet down to maybe 3 lanes or something like that.
We don't currently have any plans for road diet in that area. I do know that Raleigh Boulevard is one that we have looked at before. The one challenging factor there is it is a DOT street and coordinating that through them. But certainly, I do know that staff has started looking at some of our street classifications overall based off some changes in volume projections. So I would imagine this will be one that we can look at there too.
Thank you.
Ms. Clark.
So I had originally brought this to BPAC a year or so ago, and one of the things that I had in mind at that time was emulating the road configuration on Gorman Street, which was a very similar situation, and moving part of the greenway because there's not a slide there now, but there is a turn lane that as you're coming south on Raleigh Boulevard. There's a turn lane that you cannot use to turn left, and therefore the traffic could be moved over. I mean, we call it the Crabtree Creek Greenway. There's nothing about it that resembles a greenway, and it is it's a gap in our greenway, and so I'm a little concerned about some of the options that have significant dollar signs attached to them which means that they weren't in the bond and they're not in a current CIP. And so what are our shorter term options, and looking at something like Gorman Street as we look at the other more in-depth. And I do hate to lose, I know the resilience of the bridge over the swamp is a very real concern, but it's also, we talk about placemaking and the experience, and so many people don't even know that it's such a cool place to go see birds and turtles and everything else, and that we should be directing people there, except for the problem is it's not safe to get there.
Thank you, Ms. Clark.
And I can sort of address both of those comments. So when I mentioned the alternative with a 10-foot wide path, that's sort of an option that's similar to what you just mentioned, the Gorman Street connector. And I'm sure that would include the potential for keeping the existing sidewalk and then using some of the lane that's there to maybe put some bollards or some kind of separated thing for the cyclist to use. So my thought it would be very similar to what Gorman Street would be. And then I also just wanted to clarify that if any of these alternatives move forward at some point, there isn't an assumption that one of these would replace Structure 104. Right now, we're just sort of thinking about it as in addition to Structure 104 because it is a very unique experience that there just really aren't many like that in the region.
That's great.
Thank you, Mr. Nick Farr. Mr. Thomas?
A quick question. Of the 3 alternatives, alternative 1 looked like it was much longer, a much larger project. Do you have any sense of how the alternatives compare cost-wise or?
Not quite yet. Within the next couple of weeks, we'll have costs associated.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I do, yes.
Ms. Gellenbeck.
Thank you. Well, I'm very excited about the prospect of improvements. And like you said, it's not even, it'll take years before we actually see results, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. Is there any discussion currently to increase the safety of that interchange between the park users or the trail users and the motor vehicle traffic so that they understand that there is these different modes of speed that are engaging in this particular space? So Raleigh Boulevard and Crabtree Creek Boulevard, where they come together. It is very hostile. Elizabeth, I can't believe that you would converse with your children on it. I don't have that.
Those turtles are really cool.
They've got to be.
There are tons of them.
Is there any discussions currently for signage, which I know is, minimum, but we do need to increase the communication of of that space for all the road users that are using it.
So when you say, are you thinking of like signage that's oriented towards the vehicles that let them know that?
Both.
Because
when I arrived there as a trail user, sometimes I'll be with a group and we're debating which pedestrian crosswalk should we use? Do we use this one? Do we use that one? All of a sudden we're split because it's a time crunch because of the lights, and the motor vehicle traffic believe that they have priority. So they are making left turns very quickly, right turns very quickly. The really cool thing about Crabtree Creek Boulevard is that protected bicycle infrastructure, right? That active lane. And it leads you to this really great new gathering place. What's it
Gateway
called?
Plaza.
Yeah, Gateway Plaza, which has one of our bike share docking stations, right? So I'd like to discuss how we can implement subtle changes today that increases communication so that the different modes of transportation that are engaging in this limited space are aware of one another. I don't think drivers are out there to harm us. I think they're out there just doing their thing, and they're not anticipating us. And I'd like to have families be able to go see those turtles. All of us to go see those turtles, or I took that bike path all the way to Nightdale. I mean, it's a really unique thing. It is special. So,
Agreed.
yeah, I would like to know about that.
So I can tell you that I'm actually working on a signed contract right now that includes replacing that the confidence marker that's there at that intersection with, I think it's like a 6-panel pedestrian directional. So that'll definitely be a lot more visible to the trail users. As far as signage for the vehicles to let them know that trail users are there, I haven't noticed any specifics related to that in this analysis, but I think that it's a good thing to bring up. Seems like pretty low hanging fruit that we can certainly.
Just some yield to pedestrian signs hanging up by the stoplights would be great.
I'm not even sure if these signs exist.
Right.
So maybe that's what we can think of as a city, is that, okay, these are things that this is a new approach to trying to increase the humanity of this shared space, is to identify how can we identify this interchange as one that is a part of our Greenway Trail system. So the sign is completely different from anything that they've ever seen, so that it informs them not just a pedestrian crossing, because that they know, and then that doesn't change it. But this is a space that actually has a lot of the active transportation users versus other places.
Right.
This one really does, because we're leading people to it.
Thank you, Ms. Gallenbeck. Ms. Clark?
Well, Ms. Gallenbeck, I really think that you've hit on something that's really important. And I was dropping off some donations today at the Habitat Restore and coming down there, and I didn't even realize this was on the agenda. And it is just, it has that speed. There's nothing to tell you now that you would even be anywhere near. Note there, as he pointed out, the navigational signs are way tucked back. Nobody. So the closest thing that comes to mind for me is over on Blue Ridge Road on House Creek Greenway, where we have the flashing light, and it is a pedestrian crossing, but it's very signalized in a way that is different. And I think an important part of why that's important is that the traffic that is there When you think about Yonkers Road, you've got people who are picking up tile supplies and cabinet supplies and roofing supplies, and they may be coming from Clayton or Durham or whatever, and they're not traversing this. It's very different from the Brookside situation where it's the same people over and over, and you can educate them in a different way. This is, you're really preaching to a parade. So it has to be profound.
Ms. Alley?
I do think, this is an opportunity to think about this intersection in a different light. From the alternatives you were showing, I actually found myself preferring one that avoided the intersection entirely, whether that's through a hawk signal away from the intersection or through grade separation that you get to somehow or another. Because there is so much turn conflict at that intersection, I think you're right, like a yield to pedestrian sign. I don't know if the LPIs would be followed. Because it is a three-way intersection, like everybody almost is turning, right? So the volumes and speeds are such that it is, it's really a tragedy waiting to happen. I watch cyclists come off now, and some of them look, and rather than get off and push the beg bars, they scramble. They go diagonally through the intersection just as fast as they can. And they're, I feel like I'm going to see them say a little Hail Mary before they do it. But that, something is wrong with that intersection if that's what feels like the safest way to traverse it, is to just close your eyes and wish for luck.
Ms. Stern?
I think because there is always a car moving in that intersection, I wondered, is an all-way stop ever an option? Just red for all cars to give people
That
time
does
to
exist.
cross,
Yeah,
kind of
in other
have to
parts of
cross
the
two
city.
ways.
Yeah.
That exists in other parts of the city?
Yeah, at Trawick and Capitol Boulevard, I use that intersection every day because my neighborhood's right there. And yeah, there's a few minutes during every signal thing where there are no cars moving.
Wow.
Well,
Mr. Ritchie.
Hey, Mr. Ritchie.
I've just discovered something.
I can't make any promises.
Could you repeat that intersection? Trawick and Capitol?
Yeah.
Trawick and Capitol. Trawick and Capitol.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I just want to acknowledge that it is almost 8 o'clock, and we've had Mr. Nick Farr for some time sharing with us this update. You've obviously heard from the commission our thoughts, our feedback. Is there an action item that, you want to present before us, or was this just an opportunity for us to hear this update and kind of share thoughts from the commission?
Yeah, just informational and to provide feedback, and you all have provided really great recommendations to consider.
Well, we appreciate you and your work and your commitment to our city, Mr. Nick Farr. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
I believe we have one last final presentation for the evening from our friend, Mr. Patel, and I have no doubt that he is going to get through these BRT updates in timely fashion. I would not be surprised in the least bit. He's so professional, just nice and tight. All right, here we go.
No pressure.
Noted. Good evening, Mr. Chair and Bicycle Pedestrian Advisory Commission members. My name is Het Patel, Transportation Transit BRT Program Manager. I'm here to present an update on the overall BRT program and the agenda today. And I actually want to start by apologizing to any of the BPAC members that are on the Greenways Committee, because the slides are probably going to be very similar to what you saw at the Greenways Committee. Anyway, so I'm going to try to get through it somewhat faster and try to get you guys out on time as well. So the agenda for today is providing a quick overview of the Wake Transit Plan if anyone does not have familiarity with that plan itself, the Bus Rapid Transit features that are part of the Wake Bus Rapid Transit program, and then the total corridors and project updates, including next steps for each corridor. So in 2016, the Wake County voters approved a half-cent sales tax for transit improvements in Wake County, and it identified 4 big moves: connecting the region, connecting all Wake County communities, providing frequent, reliable urban mobility, and enhancing access to transit. Bus Rapid Transit falls within that 3rd big move, which is providing frequent, reliable urban mobility. BRT, Bus Rapid Transit, typically includes features to help it stand out from the local fixed route service. This includes dedicated bus lanes as part of the project, enhanced stations. Again, I'm not going to go through all of these, but some of the things that are interesting potentially for the Bicycle Pedestrian Advisory Commission is that we would have specialized vehicles which are larger than our regular buses, which will allow for bicycles to be boarded on the bus as opposed to in front of the bus. So when you get to a station, for a BRT station, you don't have to step down from the curb, put your bicycle in front of the bus. You just roll it onto the bus itself. We do have enhanced stations, again, that allows for level boarding. So when the bus pulls up to the station, it is at the same level as the floor of the bus, allowing for people to easily get onto the bus. And then the other two that I will probably cover just for the sake of the group is Bus Rapid Transit also includes a longer span of service. So on weekdays, we're going to be operating 4 a.m. to midnight, and on weekends, it's 5:30 a.m. to midnight. So I mentioned the Wake Bus Rapid Transit program. There are 4 Bus Rapid Transit corridors identified in the Wake Transit Plan. 3 of these projects are in a federal process to potentially receive federal grant in terms of implementation for the projects, which is the Federal Transit Administration's Capital Investment Grant process. This capital investment grant process is a competitive grant process, so you do have to submit the project, ask for a federal funding amount that you are requesting, and then go through the process to show eligibility, receive funds before you can move into the construction phase. And I'll get into that detail in just a second. But New Bern Avenue is our most advanced project. It is at about 100% design. We're really close to actually that next step for the project, which is starting construction this year. Southern Corridor is next in line at about 10% design, trying to get to 30% design this summer and advancing into final design. And then the Western Corridor is also at about 10% design and has been at 10% design for a little while, which is about a year behind the Southern Corridor at the moment. I do want to highlight the asterisk there, which means, again, before these projects can go into the construction phase, we really have to go through that federal process, get a funding allocation, and get a full funding grant agreement before we can get into the construction phase. And so again, I'm not going to cover all the details on this slide, but this is just to highlight that the federal competitive grant process is a 2-step process. Currently, the New Bern, Southern, and Western corridors are in that federal process. New Bern has actually advanced to step 2, which is the full funding grant agreement. We got that in the August of last year, which means we actually have funds to move into the construction phase of the project. The step that we're really waiting on at the moment for New Bern Avenue is final approval from the NCDOT side of things, because New Bern Avenue is an NCDOT corridor, before we can start construction for New Bern Avenue. The other 2 are within step 1 for Southern and Western corridors. Southern, again, is slightly ahead because if you look at those bullets, we have submitted the Southern Corridor for a ratings application, and Western Corridor, we have not gone to that phase yet. And again, I'll get into some of those details as I explain each project here in a second. And then the Northern Corridor is the only one that is not in color, and that is because it is not in the federal process. It is still in a planning study. The New Bern Avenue, starting with where we currently are, it's a 5.39 mile corridor radiating east from downtown Raleigh along New Bern Avenue through Wake Med at Sunnybrook Road and extending past 440 along New Bern Avenue to New Hope Road. There are 10 stations, total of 19 platforms forming inbound, outbound pairs. 7 of those 60-foot articulated buses will be needed to run at that level of frequency and service that I identified earlier. And again, of importance for this commission is that there is a 10 to 12-foot multi-use path on the south side of New Bern Avenue from Blunt Street all the way to Sunnybrook Road that would be providing bicycle pedestrian accommodation along the entire stretch of that corridor. So as we advance New Bern Avenue in design, we also worked through the BRT station design and identified 5 key goals that we wanted to be mindful of. 1, we wanted to make sure the stations had uniformity. So regardless of what corridor you're on, you'd be easily able to identify that you're approaching a BRT station. We wanted them to be scalable depending on the context, neighborhood context of the station, as well as depending on ridership, if that station needed to be bigger or smaller. Wanted to make sure we were driving inspiration from existing transit infrastructure in the region. And then we wanted to make sure that they were also considerate of the operations and maintenance costs from a materiality perspective, as well as just the overall cost of the station itself. So I'm going to flip through a few renderings and maybe highlight a couple things again that may be of interest as we go through these renderings. One of the things to identify, again, the level boarding, which is right there. Again, that means when the bus pulls up to the platform, you are level with the floor of the bus and can easily walk on. We do have amenities at the BRT station that include real-time arrival signs up here and an interactive digital touchscreen display, also again helping wayfinding, as well as additional information for when the next bus may be coming. We have art integration happening on the railings, glass windscreens, as well as the concrete that you see down there. And I will kind of flip through the renderings. So this is a rendering of a BRT station along Newbern Avenue at Raleigh Boulevard, where we have the dedicated bus lanes in the median running transit way. And here we have a signalized intersection that will have LPIs, leading pedestrian intervals, to try to get pedestrians out into the crosswalks and into the median safely. And we will have, again, high visibility crosswalks at all four corners of that intersection and wayfinding at different appropriate corners to identify if you're going inbound, or there is one pylon on that side identifying if you're going inbound or outbound from a location perspective. And so again, just kind of flip through some other additional renderings. This is the same type of typology out at Sunnybrook Road along Wake Med campus. And then this is a rendering in downtown. One of the things we wanted to be mindful of from a station design perspective for the downtown urban core stations is providing flexibility and permeability to the flow of the sidewalk right behind the station, as well as visibility to businesses behind the station as well. Southern Corridor is also about 5.1 miles with 3.8 miles of dedicated bus lanes, 10 proposed stations. 9 would be new stations. One of the stations there on the screen in gray in downtown at Wilmington Street would be part of the Newbern Avenue project. So that will likely be constructed before the Southern Corridor goes into construction. Southern Corridor will also need 7 60-foot articulated buses for providing that level of service that I identified from a frequency perspective as well as span of service. And for Southern Corridor, we were at about 10% design last summer when we submitted the project for the federal ratings process to have it rated. In March of this year, we found out that it rated medium high, which means it is eligible for federal funding. And at the same time, we actually got good news that it was recommended in FY24 President's budget for that funding at about $85.9 million. That was the overall ask that we had requested of the Federal Transit Administration. Really what that means from a next steps perspective is we need to continue advancing design on the city's end, get the project to likely 60% design, close to 65% design, go through a risk review and readiness process with our Federal Transit Administration partner and show them that we are ready to move into the construction phase. And once they have everything they need, then you get to that second step, which is the full funding grant agreement, and you actually receive those $85.9 million to move into that construction phase. And so this summer, we just actually, 2 weeks ago, council authorized a contract for Southern Corridor final design. So we are quickly moving into the next step of Southern Corridor final design. Again, this summer, there will be a transition period from 30% design moving onwards. And so I think that's probably an appropriate stage to bring back a little bit more design details related to the Southern Corridor. I will talk a little bit about the multimodal accommodations that are planned for the bus rapid transit project along the corridor itself. bicycle pedestrian accommodations along the corridor are eligible for federal funding. And what we have done is where there is enough existing right-of-way along the corridor, we are using the UDO cross streets for busway typicals that recently got approved last year or a year before to have physically separated bicycle lanes and sidewalks on the corridor. Where there are right-of-way constraints, we are pinching to a 10-foot multi-use path on both sides. Again, this is a contextual solution that based on what the right-of-way settings are along the corridor, we're trying to work through those details now at 10% design, and as we get to 30% design, we'll be able to better present that level of information for the southern corridor, and then as we move forward with the western corridor to that same level of detail, we can do the same. So the western corridor is approximately 12 miles, 20 stations. It connects downtown Raleigh to downtown Cary. It would actually need 10 60-foot articulated buses to make that level of service function operationally. And one of the reasons why the western corridor has sort of been at 10% design for a little while is there are a lot of capital projects that overlap the western corridor. Some of them are City of Raleigh projects like the Dorothea Dix Master Plan projects along the frontage of Western Boulevard. And then there's a slew of NCDOT projects along NC State's frontage as well as into town of Cary's jurisdiction that we're really trying to coordinate with and get a better understanding of the actual BRT design assumptions around those projects and a better cost estimate for the BRT design that we can submit to a federal ratings process to get the project rated and hopefully get some federal grants awarded for that one as well, or federal allocation awarded. The last corridor is the northern corridor. I mentioned earlier that is in a planning study at the moment. In 2021, the Wake Transit Plan had a vision plan update that completed and requested that the city consider extensions to the northern corridor as it was initially identified in the 2016 plan. It radiated out of downtown Raleigh up to Crabtree Boulevard on Capitol Boulevard, so it wasn't really a long corridor. The termini at that time did not make the most amount of sense, and with a lot of the growth that's happening in Midtown Raleigh, as well as Capitol Boulevard being one of our most highest ridership or most productive routes, there was a need to investigate BRT all the way to either Midtown Raleigh and to Triangle Town Center. And so currently, again, we're not in a federal process. We're in a planning study that's looking at these alternatives. This began in the summer of last year. It was anticipated to be about an 18-month process. It's probably going to take a little bit longer. Some of the pandemic actually slowed us down initially from a starting the project perspective, but we are getting ready this late summer this year, early fall, to have some public engagement on the refinement and screening of these alternatives that you see on the screen. And one of the things I want to highlight for the Northern Corridor, again, this isn't an either-or scenario, as I presented to Council earlier this March. We are looking to identify a preferred route connecting downtown Raleigh to Midtown and a preferred route connecting downtown Raleigh to Triangle Town Center. So that would be one orange alignment on the map and one blue alignment on the map that we will then take a look at from an implementation perspective. Which one is more federally competitive as a federal grant opportunity? Which one needs to be considered maybe more as a local opportunity under the Wake Transit Plan funding? And so those conversations will happen once we've refined these alternatives, once we've identified a locally preferred alternative to see which one potentially is the most competitive option. And I think that is the last slide, so I will turn it over for questions.
Well done, Mr. Patel. Thank you. Any questions from the commission? Oh, I've got two here.
Yeah, just a quick question. Does the BRT run on the same schedule as the social district downtown?
I actually do not know the hours of the social district downtown, so, but the last bus would be midnight. Yeah. So I'm
Just
assuming
wondering from
probably
a safety
not.
perspective.
Great question.
Thank you, Ms. Goodwin.
Mine was just way in the weeds. Can you run an articulated bus easily through a roundabout?
I think it depends on the design of the roundabout itself. We have run kind of turntable the Chatham Street on Western Boulevard, and a lot of the roundabouts that would be designed as part of a BRT project would have mountable curves that would allow for the buses to
Great.
be able to do that.
I'm just thinking about that northern one. I know you all aren't in, any kind of formal study yet, but there's a roundabout being designed there right now. So I'm sure you're.
Yeah. Well, and I think one of the other
Whatever
things
all the divisions talk
one of the other things to mention is actually a 60-foot articulated bus does relatively well, if not better than the regular bus in turning radii, because the back just follows the front. So at least that's what I've heard.
Fantastic. We can get some nice tight turn radii when we're off at NCDOT Street. Thank you.
Ms. Gallenbeck, and then
Yes.
Mr. Thomas.
Yeah, thank you. Do you know why they stopped the service at midnight?
I mean, that has always been our Spanish service on the local fixed route side. It actually stops at 11:30 on some routes. The BRT is going to run to midnight, and currently with the operator shortages as well, I think there are challenges to have more than that Spanish service. We do have to have a little bit of downtime.
What is the frequency of the bus?
On the BRT?
Yeah.
On the BRT, during the morning peak hours will be every 10 minutes, and the evening peak hours will be every 10 minutes. The afternoon and late evening or early morning will be about 15 minutes.
15 minutes?
Yeah.
Can you, in a nutshell, explain why we have these stations in the middle of this high motor vehicle corridor?
Yeah, so one of the reasons for split median stations or stations in the median from a dedicated lanes perspective is it allows the highest level of transit level of service. So when you have buses running on the curbside, you have more conflicts with right turning movements, with other access on the right side of the road. So putting the buses in the median allows for getting through bottlenecked in traffic conditions faster. In terms of a pedestrian environment, you're also making it easier for pedestrians to only cross half of the road as opposed to have to cross the entire road depending on which direction you're going in. So you're avoiding having to cross multiple lanes depending on the direction of travel. You just have to be really good at wayfinding and signage to make sure your transit users know which station they need to get to. Otherwise, they're going to have to cross more.
With the stations themselves, and you talked about the uniformity of the stations, will you be distinguishing them so that the riders, let's just say with colors, so one station's red, one station's blue, the other one's green, really makes it easier for riders to quickly identify, oh, this is my stop, instead of looking for a sign that says this is my stop?
So not by color. Our current brand standards are to identify, again, from a uniformity perspective, all stations on the BRT system in one way. I think we are going to have a lot of different ways of identifying what station you're at. So let me get to, there will be a pylon element with each BRT station that really shows the station name and the countdown for when the next bus is coming. This pylon element also has the station name signage, and then the station names also show up facing the roadway side as well. So there are different places where the station names would show up, but we do not have color differentiation for every station.
So people on the bus, because they're the ones that I'm thinking about.
Yeah, and so the people on the bus will also have a screen inside the bus that says what the next 3 stops are coming. That's a wayfinding that's available to them inside the bus,
Okay.
and they have the opportunity for the next bus. And they also have audio announcements that happen that say the next station is Raleigh
great.
Boulevard.
I also wanted to ask about you mentioned the multi-user path that was going to be on the south side. There's not a multi-user path on both sides of New Bern Avenue?
There is not, and that is partially, we have sidewalk on the north side of New Bern Avenue, and there was a New Bern Avenue pedestrian improvements project before the BRT project, and in March of 2020, council directed to consolidate the BRT project and the pedestrian improvement project. So the south side multi-use path was part of that project that got inherited into the BRT project as well. But we do not have enough right-of-way to do multi-use path on both sides of New Bern Avenue.
Okay. And my last question is to address the comfort level for waiting at the bus stop. So the noise level, where it's situated in the middle of this high motor vehicle roadway, impacts your comfort level, adds stress while you're waiting. Is there anything in the design that will be accommodating or reducing the sound while the person is waiting there, like sound absorbers or anything of that nature? Have you guys considered the impact of the air, noise, pollution that your bystanders are exposed to by being in that position?
Yeah, so we have considered safety while you're out in the median stations. There are windscreens there on those median stations and a more hard back edge, because that's the back edge that's against the travel lanes, as opposed to the 2 lanes that you're facing are the BRT lanes where the buses are only coming every 10 minutes. So you are far removed on the front end of the station, and the back end of the station does provide more of that sound barrier with the windscreens as well as a wall.
Okay.
We don't have in the plans any sound absorbers.
I think that it should be brought up. The station the Go Raleigh station downtown is an incredibly difficult station to sit in because of the sound that's reverberating off of all of that concrete. And I just think that we should be bringing that more and more to our attention in the design phase if we're exposing people to it.
Thank you. That's a good comment.
Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Gellenbeck. Mr. Thomas?
I had the same question about the multi-use path only being on the south side. That's unfortunate that we can't do the north side as well, because people are going to walk and bike to get on the bus. They're not going to drive their cars to get on the bus. So maybe we can look at that in the future.
TC3 will get you a behind-the-curb multi-use path or bike and pedaling with any redevelopment on that street, or it should apply there if they subdivide the land and it's applicable to them.
Thank you, Mr. Thomas. Ms. Alley?
I can wait.
Ms. Gellenbeck?
Joe, do you have a question?
I just have a quick question about timeline on New Bern. I mean, I know we have many things that are kind of outside of our control with DOT and utility companies and stuff like that, but do you have kind of a general idea of when the plan is to actually start construction on New Bern? I know you said 23, but we're halfway through the year already. So
that's the question I got in March from council as well. So our current target is fall 2023. So again, we're hoping to put out a construction bid here this summer, and hopefully by August, September, actually be in a position to take a bid to council to award, and then depending on how long it takes, as long as we get a low bid, depending on how long it takes to mobilize, but hopefully sometime this fall you'll see construction. And the utility relocation work has already started.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I mean, just as a comment, I guess, I know that there's been, I know these projects are quite involved with many stakeholders, but I think one thing that we've heard, and I've heard specifically, quite a bit from people in the community, is we've had plannings and meetings and engagement, and year after year, and people want to see a shovel in the ground. So I think people are ready to start seeing some dirt moving here, and I'm sure people will be glad whenever they can get on the bus.
Thank you.
Ready with a shovel right now.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Caruso.
Yes.
Ms. Gellenbeck?
Thank you. I am interested in learning more about secure bicycle parking. The traditional racks that have been used in the past really aren't going to accommodate for that long-term parking. The vulnerability of theft is high. I'd like to hear more about what the city is planning to accommodate those users of the BRT that are traveling to the stations by bike?
Yes, I mean, I guess I would say there's probably a couple options. You know, if you are really concerned about the security of where you were leaving your bicycle, you could easily take the bicycle on the bus with you. BRT allows you more flexibility to do that than the local.
How many bikes can go on a BRT bus?
You can have at least 2 that will go inside the bus with a rack, and then there'll be standing room. So it really is like a light rail vehicle. If you can think of, you know, if you're taking the bus for only a couple stops, you can stand with your bike on the bus. You don't have to put it in the locking mechanism. And we also are working internally on the vehicle itself for the locking mechanism to be a more user-friendly option, which is the spin lock interlock. I don't know if you've seen them. A lot of the West Coast agencies have these where you put the front wheel in and there's a pulley system that kind of helps you guide the bicycle up and lock it in place, as opposed to manually having to lift your bicycle up and lock the front wheel.
Well, the city is, doing a pilot project for the e-bike incentive, right? Riding your bike in Raleigh is difficult, but the e-bike definitely enables you to go further, and more people can cycle because of it. And so those bikes are heavy. I don't know if you've ever had the opportunity to manipulate one, but they're about 50 pounds at best. Most of them are 65, so they're weighty and difficult to maneuver onto a bus. Leaving them exposed outside is not emotionally comfortable because of their vulnerability to thefts. So I think it's short-sighted to not have a product out there that is like a locker of some sort for the e-bike users, so that they can arrive at the station, park their bike, and catch the bus. It is going to feed BRT. We don't have the residencies that's within walking distance of it right now, right? So to ask people to traverse by walking to reach BRT is going to be less desirable, but to have them traverse by bicycle, they can get there 3 times faster.
Yeah, I mean, we can take a look at strategic locations. I would just say that, again, from a right-of-way perspective, at all 10 stations, it would likely not make sense to have a locker along the right-of-way, along New Bern Avenue or any of the other corridors, to have bicycle lockers at all of those stations. We can look at strategic locations for park and rides, or the downtown termini, basically the end of the lines, or maybe some other places where it does make sense, or if a private development wants to partner with something like that.
Just as a quick follow to that, would this also be an appropriate conversation for the station area planning and engagement that happens, to maybe incorporate some of that feedback in the future?
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly where the conversation lives, just because, again, I think from a locker space perspective, we haven't necessarily done enough investigation to know what best, how much space that really needs, what those right-of-way needs would be like. And again, I think, at least from our planning perspective, we have provided enough opportunities for bicyclists to use the BRT more seamlessly than they currently use the transit system, and allow for opportunities either at the termini or other areas where we do have some bicycle racks that they could lock their bicycle at, but just not lockers.
Thank you. Ms. Gellenbeck? Well, I'll tell you what, I will acknowledge that.
I'm holding back because you can imagine what I'm thinking. Yes, I think so.
Conversation. This is an update
I think
tonight.
to think that only 2 bikes would accommodate a growing population on a bus is insulting.
Well,
honestly,
I think
I'm not trying to put you down. I just can't hold it in any further.
To clarify, and just to clarify, though, I think that if I heard it correctly, like right now we have a system where it's only 2 bikes on those front racks of a bus, of a traditional bus. Moving forward with the BRT system and the BRT buses, in addition to having 2, I guess, locking sort of racks or mechanisms on board the bus, there should also be space in addition to that, on the bus that could accommodate folks who may only be riding for a stop or two. Now, I will acknowledge that at the same time, we have a rapidly growing community of cyclists, both traditional and e-bikes. I mean, we're actively pursuing this e-bike pilot program to encourage the growth of that community. And I would like to think that this commission and future iterations of this commission will be engaged in the future design process moving forward for the additional corridors, which, are still in design, unlike New Bern, which is effectively, I think we are moving forward as quickly as we can to get to the shovels in the ground. So ultimately, I think that, Ms. Gellenbeck, your concerns are heard by both the commission and our colleagues on staff.
For sure.
Thank you. I think that Mr.
Thank you for being here tonight. Couple of questions. I'm interested in, as a frequent rider, I'm interested in, will the BRT eventually replace some existing routes, or will they supplement them?
So the current plan is that for routes where there is an underlying service, the local service would be replaced by bus rapid transit.
Okay. I mean, I noticed you were talking about going to the mall, going north, and and the number 1 bus already has 15-minute headways. So I mean, it's an improvement, but not a huge one. So I just was curious about that, and I was also curious on the western, the western approach, because the 300 bus currently serves that way right now. Would other buses be able to use the bus lanes in addition to the BRT buses themselves, or would that be restricted simply to the BRT buses?
So we have done some peer evaluation on that. There are different schools of thought. Our system will be dedicated bus lanes for the bus rapid transit lanes only, for the BRT buses only.
Okay. Thank you. And for the record, I would settle for a bench at my bus stop, so. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Rotenberry. Mr. Patel, deeply appreciate you. If there are no further questions from the commission or comment, I think that here at 8:30, we want to express our gratitude to Mr. Patel for all the work being done to advance these tremendous improvements in our local transit system.
Thank you.
Thank you. My friends, I think we have reached the time to advance our work plan and advance ourselves out of here as quickly as we can. Ms. Godwin, would you, I guess, help us move forward here? What exactly needs to happen? I know it appears we have a completed work plan that we drafted together, we edited together at our last meeting in May. Is it simply a matter of a member of the commission advancing a motion to approve it and then getting a second and then we adopt it? Is that, Ms. Godwin, the move here?
That's correct, yep.
Move approval.
I have a move to approve. Do I have a move and a second from Mr. Thomas. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, our bicycle work plan is approved. Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Commission 2023-24 work plan is approved. Moving forward,
Can I just ask one question?
Yes, Ms. Clark.
Do you know when you'll be presenting it to council?
That will most likely be in August. August, yes, because we will take the July recess along with council, but then we'll come back, we'll reconvene in August.
Do ours July 5th. Just
Oh, well, Godspeed.
zooming back in.
Well, but thank you. Thank you, Ms. Clark. Thank you, Ms. Godwin. Up next, we have our officer elections. Ms. Godwin, you want to kind of walk us through this? Do we just proceed with?
Yes, so for chair and vice chair, we have one nomination for each. So, Mr. Chair, I'll turn it over to you to hold a vote.
Okay. Well, for chair and vice chair, if we can just do this all at once. For chair, we have Nick Neptune, nominated by the commission, and we have Joe Caruso nominated to serve as vice chair. Do we have a motion to approve?
I'm early voting.
Early voting, and I see, I think I see a second from, I see multiple seconds. Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, we have our nominations approved for chair and vice chair. Moving forward with expediency, the chair's report. It's been a great year. Looking forward to serving another term as your chair. Thank you for your service with this commission. Up next, Planning Committee, one pending item. Mr. Tong.
We met with Jason Myers at the last meeting to talk about 5 points, and we expressed our desire to have more options for bicycle connectivity in the future with the project.
Great update, Mr. Tong. Thank you. Up next, Policy Committee, Mr. Caruso.
Yeah, we met yesterday afternoon with staff, and we're starting to go through as a follow-up item from the retreat, kind of the next steps on TC3 and kind of how we move that program forward to get to have behind the curb bike facilities, and kind of working with staff and how we can support them and make that process a little bit more streamlined and quick after it's been live for about a year and a half now, and we've had some feedback from both staff and the development community. So we'll continue to work on that.
Great update, Mr. Caruso. Outreach Committee, that's me. No pending items. I will acknowledge, though, that though there are no pending items for Outreach Committee, both members of the Outreach Committee and members of the Fuller Commission, I'm grateful to say, have been very engaged in our community, and I think that tonight's turnout for public comment from our community is a reflection of that. Mr. Thomas.
Are you continuing to be the chair of the Outreach Committee?
With the beginning of our next term, Mr. Thomas will take on the chairmanship of the Outreach Committee.
Good answer. And are there any other members of the Outreach Committee?
There are. We shall discuss that at the next Outreach Committee meeting in August.
10-4.
Up next, staff reports.
Couple of small updates from my end. Number one, Cardinal Bike Share is officially reopened. Very excited to have that service back. Rides are free through the first 60 days since June 7th, so that times out to be the beginning of August, sometime around that first or second week. So take advantage of that. If you don't already have a membership, certainly utilize that free ride. Additionally, wanted to give a quick update on the bike lane sweeper pilot program that has been going on the last 6 weeks. So got a report back from our street maintenance team that's been leading the on the ground efforts there. They've been able to get through all 6 of those pilot streets. So just as a quick reminder, those are Limeberry, West Street, Harrington Street, Morgan Street, and Crabtree Boulevard, and then Gorman Street. So just kind of some quick takeaways. Unsurprisingly, a lot of the sections that are outside of the downtown core took quite a bit longer, mostly due to the environmental factors in those areas. So our crew was able to get to all of these pilot lanes, excuse me, in about 6 weeks with our existing resources, which just as a reminder means that we don't have any dedicated staff right now. So these are just, as people were available to go out and deploy the bike lane sweepers on these corridors and get to them as they could. And then lastly, just wanted to highlight that this data is taken outside of the leaf collection season. So, 6 months from now, we'll probably be talking very different numbers in terms of timing. But just kind of a broad overview, it took approximately 34 hours to get to all of these corridors in total, which amounts to about 4.5 days for one full sweep through for all 6 sections, totaling 7.1 miles. So just, wanted to provide an update so that the commission kind of has an idea about where we're heading. And also just wanted to provide that it took about 6 weeks for them to get through, so we'll probably have another update in August or September.
Ms. Godwin, thank you for those updates. I've got a quick question about the e-bike program pilot. If I understand it correctly, we're still, as a staff, identifying the details of that pilot program. Is that correct?
That's correct. And so the Office of Sustainability is managing that effort. I believe it's expected to launch as a pilot later this fall, if I'm correct. But we'll get the BPACR report about timing on that.
Thank you. I think the commission would appreciate updates on the timing and the details of the program. I will just acknowledge that as a commission, I think many of us have gotten a lot of questions with enthusiasm about participation in that pilot program. And so we look forward to hearing more. Any questions from the commission?
Mm-hmm. Yes. So, Ms. Godwin, I am interested in the policies that are used to keep motor vehicle lanes clear of debris or low-hanging branches, and compare that to the policies that are applied to our bike lane infrastructure. And the reason why I ask is that the bike lane infrastructure repeatedly has got plants, branches, plants growing in them, the debris. And I just feel like we need to study how our response as a city is managing the conditions of those, in addition to this sweep. You know, I think there's more that we should be analyzing. I want to have the city respond to the bike lanes infrastructure as quickly as they do to motor vehicle lanes when they're obstructed.
Yes, so certainly appreciate that feedback. I mean, we're taking that first step with this bike lane sweeper pilot. As I mentioned, our resources are none at this point, so we're trying to utilize existing services and reallocate them when possible. Definitely, I think as this program continues to build up and we are able to get more permanent resources, we will be able to deploy those resources more frequently and more assertively and more proactively. Sorry, Mr. Chair.
No.
You're gonna say, okay. So definitely, hear your comments, and, I think we've got some things in the works with the data that we're going to be getting from this pilot that can help us be more proactive about what you're seeing in the field.
And I'd just like to offer as a follow to that comment regarding the constraints on our city staff, I wonder if while we navigate the follow-through on the pilot and the reports, et cetera, if maybe our policy committee could take time to review what's happening elsewhere in other peer cities as it relates to how they're addressing the maintenance of not just the street for cars, but the maintenance of our streetscapes for other modes, right? And so I feel like,
Yeah,
I think
it really is about addressing the quality. It's about raising the level of service for both infrastructure modes. And so, yeah, I think that's a great idea proposed, because it can't be just because we got these two sweeps going out there. There's more going on than that.
And real quick, I've got Ms. Clark on the side. Ms. Clark?
Well, I want to follow up and second that, and especially on near sites with construction, the amount of sand and gravel, and so we need to look at a policy that allocates the burden for maintaining the bike lane appropriately to where it was created. And I mean, I have seen people and myself almost taken some bad spills because of thick sand that's near a construction site, and there's
and it goes back to, again, if that was a motor vehicle lane, the city would be proactive. So what is it that they're doing? What is the policy that's creating that reaction? But yet for the bike infrastructure, it's not.
I would love for this conversation to continue with our policy committee.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
For something completely different, I'm new, so I'm curious. Does the city get the data from not only the bike share, but also the micromobility, so scooters and stuff like that?
Yes, we do get data for both.
Is that something you share with this committee by any chance?
We can share it. I don't have that information in front of me, but can bring it back as a report at a future meeting.
I think it would be interesting just to see, I don't know, quarterly updates, something like that, just to kind of see, maybe even parse through some of that data, see where hotspots are. I think it would be very interesting to learn about.
Yeah, we can bring that back.
Thank you.
I will, I'm sure staff has more detailed data, but I will say that I've noticed that there is some data on the city data portal thing, so that it shows how many rides there are per month and per day, and I mean you get a good high level picture of where people are riding and how frequently and things like that. But yeah, I mean I think it would be nice to have just kind of an ongoing report that just kind of gets automatically sent, if that could be created.
Thank you. Thank you.
Chair Neptune, just very, very quickly, if I may, just
Yes,
a clarification question for Ms. Godwin. You mentioned that the non-downtown Raleigh sections took longer, and is that just because of the travel time to them, or was there some other factor that cause them to require more time from city staff and equipment?
So we tracked time to get there separately of time spent sweeping. So just for comparison, Lineberry took 14 hours. Crabtree Boulevard took 12 and a half hours. And then West Street took 30 minutes. Harrington Street took 30 minutes. And Morgan Street took 1 hour. Gorman Street took 5.5 hours.
Yeah, I think there's a lot for policy to dig into there. So, yeah.
Agreed. If there's no further comment from the commission during our staff reports, we will proceed with any general board comments here at 8:43. Any general board comments at 8:43? Mr. Thomas.
Yeah, I have a couple things. I wonder if there's any update on the Hillsborough Street bike lanes. You presented to us in March, I think, a couple of options, and then we came back with the planning committee met and then presented a third option, and I'm just kind of wondering if there's a additional update on that.
Great question.
Yes. So we are moving forward with restriping and markings plans for that project. So we did take the feedback of the commission and are doing the hybrid option where we're restriping the existing lane and additionally adding sharrows in the vehicle travel lane, as was recommended by the planning committee.
That's fantastic news.
Yeah, that's great news.
Thank
For
you.
the celebration.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, make some noise.
Thank you.
That is great news indeed. Any further general board comment that might elicit that kind of reaction, I tell you what, you might want to just hold that breath.
Yeah.
All right, well, let's, I see Ms. Clark. Ms. Clark?
Well, first I want to say thank you to Ms. Bravo Taylor and to Mr. Thomas for attending our Greenway meetings. They add immeasurably. I am so appreciative of the comments and insights that they offer. So anybody else who wants to come, we have a meeting on Monday, July 10th, we meet at 4 o'clock. But one of the things that you may know is partly open now, although you're not really supposed to be on it, is the Crabtree West extension. And that's a big deal in the city. And so separate from the official ribbon cutting that the city will do, we've been talking with Jared Haber of
Oaks and Spokes
and other folks, and we're looking to put together an event planning committee. And so we'll really get started in probably early mid-August. The extension should be complete at in sometime in October. And so if you like to plan events, fun things, I've looked at the property that when you come down Glenwood Avenue, there's a office building that has a big parking lot right there at the Galax Bridge on Crabtree. And so we're approaching them to use that as sort of a staging area, and then you could ride out west or you could ride east, and we're looking at, do we do Umstead to the News River kinds of things, but also have lots of options for people, and t-shirts and bike rodeo kind of things. And so just wanted to plant that seed for you, and
Well, Ms. Clark, I think
like a lot of help.
we appreciate that seed being planted, and I wonder if this might be a good activity for our new chair of Outreach Committee to
Sounds
engage.
perfect. Yeah.
Love that. Love that. Thank you, Ms. Clark, and thank you for recognizing Commissioners Bravo Taylor and Commissioner Thomas for their service on the Greenway Committee. Up next, we have upcoming events.
I have one more general comment, if
yes.
I may.
We'll backtrack to the general board.
Be quick
Mr.
about
Thomas,
it.
yeah.
I had been hearing some reports about parked buses blocking a bike lane on South Blunt Street, right there where the Go Raleigh station is, across from Moore Square Park. And apparently this is not just a one-off thing. This is a habitual type thing where the buses are being parked in the bike lane, also obscuring a crosswalk. I checked it out last weekend, and lo and behold, there was one. I drove by there tonight. There were 2 buses parked there. I looked at the Google Street data. There was one parked there in August of 2021, as well as in March of 2022. So I'm not sure what's going on there, but can maybe city staff look into that? Why a bus is parked there, not in service, no people on it, blocking a bike lane, obscuring a crosswalk view for, I think, what's probably a heavily used crosswalk between Moore Square and the Go Raleigh station.
Yeah, take a look.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Thomas. Ms.
Yeah.
Gellenbeck?
Yeah, I can add that that's been going on since 2018. So I've talked to the drivers, and they say they have permission to do it.
Well, I look forward to hearing the findings from staff as it relates to like what exactly is happening. I mean, I think frankly these are, I would like to acknowledge, valid concerns. I mean, you know, so again, for our colleagues and city staff, if you could just maybe come back with some information as to what exactly is going on, what's informing the decision making of our colleagues who are operators for our transit system. With no further general board comment, we will move forward with upcoming events at 8:48. Well, as I understand it, we do have July 4th at Dix Park. All are welcome. We also have the July 10th Greenway Committee meeting at 4 o'clock. Feel encouraged? At 3:03, right upstairs. Okay. Other than that, I think we can move forward with our confirmation for our next meeting, which will not be on June 27th. That will be, should be August 27th. Our next, or what am I reading here? Am I reading this right? Here it is, August 21st. I don't know why I'm reading, what does this mean? June, oh, that's the day. That is the day. Okay, you know what? It's 8:49, so pardon me. Our next meeting will be August 21st, 2023. And with that, this commission is adjourned. Thank you.